Chapter 396. The sudden explosion of the smoke one shield stunned all the heaven immortals present. Even Taoist Mo Wan's mind went blank, as he could not figure out what was going on. No matter what, Taoist Mo Wan had asked a 29th tier item crafting master from Puyo Heavenly Realm, and spent several tens of thousands of years to gather the geocentric crimson flame dark copper. It was an immortal item that Taoist Mo Wan was proud of. Not even ordinary heaven immortals could break the defense of the smoke one shield, yet it was completely destroyed by these two great serpents. Taoist Qi and Taoist Min had their mouths agape at the same time. Taoist Qi had a strange smile on his face, while Taoist Min's face turned blue. Meanwhile, all the heaven immortals from Yuanhua sect turned to look at Wu Qi at the same time. This little fellow was the master of these two great serpents. Goldhorn's tail slapped heavily on Taoist Mo Wan's chest. Taoist Mo Wan had never tempered his immortal body, and only focused on the cultivation of his immortal soul and magical power. However, dragon pythons of fire and ice were famous for their powerful fleshly bodies since the ancient times. With just a swing of their tails, they left a half-foot deep wound on Taoist Mo Wan's chest, nearly cutting him open. A large amount of golden immortal blood sprayed out from the wound, while Taoist Mo Wan was knocked flying backward and slammed headfirst into Silverhorn. Laughing strangely, Silverhorn grabbed Taoist Mo Wan with one claw and shoved him into his mouth. While attacking, he said hastily, "Don't worry, elder brother. I'll eat the upper body, and leave the lower body for you. TSK, there is still a good ingredient for the three-whip soup." Goldhorn cursed anxiously, curling up his body and leaping towards Silverhorn. Upper body, upper body. 70% of the essence of an immortal was gathered in the upper body. The internal organs were the source of the five energies in an immortal's body, the head was the place where the immortal's soul and intelligence gathered, and the most valuable thing of an immortal was the upper body. If Silverhorn took the upper body for himself, didn't that mean all the benefits of Mo Wan would belong to him? As for the good ingredient, Goldhorn was not interested in it at all. The two great serpents were rolling and struggling in midair for the sake of Taoist Mo Wan, who was badly wounded. Taoist Mo Wan was tightly gripped by Silverhorn's claws, and the tremendous force nearly crushed his severely wounded immortal body. The destruction of the smoke phoenix shield had affected his immortal soul and caused it to suffer a heavy injury. Presently, his mind was in a state of turmoil, and he didn't even have the strength to fight back. Nevertheless, Taoist Mo Wan had no time to care about the discomfort, as he kept howling at the top of his voice, "How could this be? The Smoke Phoenix Shield is a 30th grade immortal artifact. How can it be shattered by two beasts who have just condensed their nascent divinities? How could this be? The Smoke One Shield is a 30th grade immortal artifact, the masterpiece of Master Swan Dan. How could you break it?" Wu Qi stood on the ground with his hands behind his back and sneered. Using the mystic eyes of universe, Wu Qi had seen the scene of the Smoke One Shield shattering. That's right, it was a grade 30 immortal artifact, a pretty good item. Unfortunately, its main material was the geocentric scarlet flame mysterious copper. This kind of pure yang material had amazing defensive power. It had excellent defensive power against all kinds of true fire and lightning spells. However, everyone has their own advantages and disadvantages, and every living thing under the heaven had something that could restrain them. The geocentric scarlet flame mysterious copper was afraid of the attack from acquired energy. Goldhorn's scorching flames and hot air did not pose any threat to the smoke phoenix shield, but the cold gleam shot out by Silverhorn contained a thread of innate energy that was unique to the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice, which was produced by using their own bodies as the cauldron. The power of the cold gleam was incredible, and the smoke phoenix shield was perfectly restrained by it. How could it not shatter? Seeing that Taoist Mo Wan was about to be tortured to death by the two brothers, Wu Qi cleared his throat and cried out, "All right, Goldhorn, Silverhorn, put down Uncle Master Mo Wan. If you eat something wrong, you will have diarrhea." Goldhorn and Silverhorn, who were chasing each other in midair, turned stiff immediately, lowering their heads like deflated balloons. Silverhorn rolled his eyes and loosened his claws, causing Taoist Mo Wan to fall down like a rock. However, Taoist Mo Wan was, after all, an experienced heaven immortal. Although he was severely wounded just now, he still managed to catch his breath and stabilize his body after falling for several hundred feet. He gave Goldhorn and Silverhorn a glance, who looked dejected and sad because their delicacies were gone, and said with a deep voice, "For today's humiliation, I." Wu Qi interrupted Taoist Mo Wan. With both hands clasped behind his back, he sighed and said, "Why are you bickering with two beasts, Uncle Master? They know nothing, and they are just two greedy beasts. They are just transcending their thunder tribulation, yet they were insulted by someone. That is why their wild nature flared up and attacked you, Uncle Master. As a heaven immortal, bickering with two beasts is a disgrace to your status." Although Wu Qi's words were extremely unpleasant to the ears, they had captured the thoughts of these heaven immortals. It was Taoist Mo Wan who insulted Goldhorn and Silverhorn first, and then the two beasts attacked him. They were beasts, so how could one reason with them? Taoist Mo Wan brought this upon himself, and no one could help him. As for the fact that Taoist Mo Wan's prized immortal item was destroyed, and he himself was severely wounded by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. How could he still have the nerve to continue talking about this matter when he could not even deal with the two beasts he mentioned? Taoist Mo Wan's face turned green and red with anger, and he nearly coughed out blood. Fortunately, he knew that he was now suffering from more injuries. In the battle with Huiling's sect, he was already severely wounded, and 70% of his cultivation base was temporarily crippled. Now, he was wounded by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. If he coughed out another mouthful of blood, it would undoubtedly be one disaster after another, and his immortal soul and energy would be damaged. For Taoist Mo Wan, every drop of blood was extremely precious, and the loss of a drop of blood would make his injuries worse. He cupped his fist and bowed to Taoist Min without saying a word. With a gloomy face, he picked up the broken pieces of the Smoke One shield and put away its item spirit and soul, then staggered and stepped onto a cloud, preparing to leave. But right at this moment, a beam of golden light sprinkled down from the sky and shone on Taoist Mo Wan's body. An enormous immortal energy essence was injected into Taoist Mo Wan's body from afar, healing his injuries at an incredible speed. Taoist Qi, Taoist Min, and Immortal Tai Yu were startled. These heaven immortals cupped their fists and said, "Ancestral Master, you." Patriarch Yuan Hua's voice was heard coming from afar. "Qi'er, Min'er, Mo Wan, Wu Qi, come here, all of you," he said in a low voice. Those who were called by Patriarch Yuan Hua dared not to be negligent. Without hesitation, they quickly stepped onto clouds and flew towards Green Cliff Mountain. The beam of golden light followed Taoist Mo Wan all the way to Green Cliff Mountain, and only then it slowly faded away. After being replenished by the enormous immortal energy essence in the golden light, Taoist Mo Wan's injuries were 70 to 80% healed, and even his immortal body, which was severely wounded by Huiling sect's immortals, had almost fully recovered. As Patriarch Yuan Hua's cultivation base was much stronger than Taoist Mo Wan, the fact that he was consuming his own energy essence to heal Taoist Mo Wan was like an elephant transfusing blood to an ant. Every little bit of blood the elephant lost was more than enough for the ant to exchange all its blood. In Patriarch Yuan Hua's eyes, Taoist Mo Wan's injuries were nothing serious. But, immortal energy essence was extremely important, and if it was not necessary, which heaven immortal would waste his own energy essence to heal someone else? That would be too great a loss. The group of 4 men and 2 serpents came before Patriarch Yuan Hua's wooden hut, but they still could not find him. The door was tightly shut, and they could only hear his voice. "Are these 2 great serpents the legendary ancient extraordinary beasts, dragon pythons of fire and ice?" "Excellent. With just one snow-armored heaven-devouring python, Eminent Cloud Sect is able to reign supreme in Puyuo heavenly realm. In the future, Yuan Hua Sect will not be weaker than them." Goldhorn and Silverhorn twitched their mouths and turned their heads away indifferently. What was a snow-armored heaven-devouring python? According to the bloodline memories of the brothers, this little fellow was nothing but a disdainful existence. Dragon pythons of fire and ice were the supreme existences of the ancient scaled clan, while snow-armored heaven-devouring python was at most a local tyrant. The gap between them was simply too huge. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave Goldhorn and Silverhorn a few praises, then his tones suddenly turned extremely heavy. It has been 100,000 years. You should have had enough, right? Daoist Qi and Daoist Min's faces flickered with fear. They exchanged a glance, then dropped to their knees at the same time. Daoist Mo Wan dared not to say a word, and hastily dropped to his knees as well. Patriarch Yuan Hua sighed and said, "Many years ago, the few of us, master and disciples, had spent a lot of effort to build a strong foundation in Puyo heavenly realm. But, because of Qing Fu, both of you turned against each other, causing a foul atmosphere in the sect. For the sake of the relationship between us, master and disciple, I allowed you to do whatever you wanted. Now, have you had enough?" Daoist Qi and Daoist Min remained kneeling on the ground, daring not to say a word. They just kept kowtowing. Cold sweat kept breaking out of Daoist Mo Wan's forehead, and his body was trembling slightly. Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a deep voice, "Today, I'll make the final decision. That's enough. A formidable enemy is approaching us, and a great calamity is right before our eyes. Yet, we still want to make a scene. Are you going to let Yuan Hua Sect's foundation vanish before you stop?" Daoist Qi and Daoist Min asked in surprise, "What do you mean by that, master?" Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a deep voice, "This is a very serious matter. Apart from me, only you, Chi'er and Minner, can know about it. Chi'er, assemble all the disciples who will participate in the match, and make the final preparations. During the match, you will lead the team and keep watch. I'll only appear when I'm fighting with that old fogey Huiling alone. As for Minner, bring your capable disciples and bring all the thunderbolt seeds we have in our storage. You can use all the powerful immortal talismans, formation flags, and formation discs." Grinning coldly, Patriarch Yuan Hua said with a hint of killing intent, "In 10 days' time, a strange beast will transcend its thunder tribulation in the windy plain of Zhangtu planet. Minner, bring all the disciples and sneak in. Find an opportunity to severely injure that strange beast during the thunder tribulation." Daoist Qi and Daoist Min were taken aback at the same time. Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he asked in a deep voice, "Ancestral Master, is that strange beast the snow-armored heaven-devouring python from Eminent Cloud sect? Could it be that he is about to advance his cultivation base by another tier? Is that enough for him to transform into a human form?" Daoist Qi, Daoist Min, and Daoist Mo Wan were taken aback, but they quickly nodded their heads as if they were enlightened. After a full 15 minutes, Patriarch Yuan Hua continued speaking. However, his tone was filled with a strong surprise and joy. "Wu Qi, my dear disciple, you are a smart and quick-witted one. Ha, it is the great python of Eminent Cloud sect, the snow-armored heaven-devouring python, who is about to transcend his thunder tribulation." Wu Qi laughed, nodded his head thoughtfully and said, "No wonder Yun Tianao was so easy to talk to when Yun Wuqi was eaten by catfish." Patriarch Yuan Hua laughed and said, "That's right. No wonder Yun Tianao was so easy to talk to that day." Whispers replaced the laughter. Wu Qi and his company began to discuss in low voices with Patriarch Yuan Hua across the wooden hut. Chapter 397. With an awkward smile on his face, Wu Qi quickly turned his head and grabbed Princess Zhang Li's little hand, telling her that he was already an ordinary mortal in the mortal world, and that it was impossible for him to have anything to do with the Buddhist League. Guru Gu was taken aback, then a faint smile emerged on his face and his lips moved slightly. Then, his voice rang out in Wu Qi's mind once again, "Don't be afraid, don't panic, benefactor. You are fated with the Buddhist League, and sooner or later, you will convert to the Buddhist League and comprehend the supreme principles together. Everyone around you, as long as you know them, can join the Buddhist League and become a bodhisattva, a vajra, or a protector of the heavenly kings. All of them are supreme Buddhas. There are 3,000 great Daos in the Buddhist League, and all 3,000 great Taoists can lead to supreme Buddhas. The pure land of ultimate bliss of the Buddhist League is a supreme land. The magical techniques of the Buddhist League are boundless, so. All of a sudden, a bright and clear ray of light sprinkled down from the sky, as over 100 cultivators were descending at a high speed amidst a large cloud of light. Immortal Chuan raised his eyelids and gave them a glance, then clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Wonderful. The fellow immortals from Huiling sect are here. He, only the people from Yuanhua sect are left." Gritting his teeth, he calculated that Huiling sect's overall strength would never be able to fight against the celestial court of Hua Luo heavenly realm represented by Reverend Miao Miao, and he was far from being a match for Reverend Miao Miao, a 26th tier heaven immortal. Although Reverend Huilin had a bellyful of anger, he could only smile and nod at the surrounding immortals. As immortals had endless years, it was only natural that they would be extremely bored. Standing next to Immortal Chuan was Reverend Miao Miao, the immortal monarch of Celestial Court of Hua Luo Heavenly Realm, a lower upper grade heavenly realm bordering Puluo Heavenly Realm. He pulled out a large dice bowl from under his sleeve and shouted, "Fellow immortals, come. Today is the grand occasion, how can we not make a bet? Place your bets, place your bets. Who will be the winner between the disciples of Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect? Who will be the ancestral masters of both sects? Place your bets. The lowest bet is 1 immortal stone." Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Daoist Qi glared at Reverend Huilin without showing any sign of weakness. He said coldly, "My master is adjusting his breath in a secluded place and recuperating his spirit. He'll be ready to draw his sword and kill him later." Reverend Huilin froze for a moment and frowned. After the duel between the disciples of the two sects, the finale was the duel between him and Patriarch Yuanhua. Before the duel between two immortals with similar cultivation bases, one impatiently traveled a long way from Huangqiao planet to Puluo Heavenly Realm with his disciples, while the other meditated somewhere outside Puluo Heavenly Realm, and the other meditated and regulated his breath. Therefore, the difference in strength between the two was obvious. Unknowingly, Patriarch Yuanhua had gained the upper hand. Reverend Huilin's expression immediately turned extremely unsightly. "I'm having a life and death duel with my disciple here, yet you, Reverend Miao Miao, are betting on this life-threatening shady business?" Reverend Huilin was severely wounded, and did not look much better than 1 year ago. Clad in a bright red Taoist robe and a Taoist crown on his head, he came before the group of immortals on a cloud, together with over 100 disciples. Reverend Huilin glanced around, then cupped his fist and said in a deep voice, "Fellow immortals, you have come from afar. After Huiling sect wins the victory today, we will hold a feast to celebrate with all of you." Reverend Gu he had a green wooden medallion tied around his waist, engraved with 4 glinting relics. Surprisingly, he was a golden arhat with a cultivation base equivalent to a 24th tier heaven immortal, 1 level higher than Immortal Chuan, a 25th tier heaven immortal. A soundless Buddhist chant rang out directly in Wu Qi's mind, "Merciful Buddha. Benefactor, you are destined to meet the Buddha." Reverend Miao Miao was beaming with joy, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. He and Immortal Chuan's brows twitched, and immediately came to an agreement. Reverend Miao Miao would be the banker, while Immortal Chuan, as the host, would get 50% of the profit. In the sky above the glazed heaven immortal abode, where Immortal Chuan was cultivating in seclusion, a fragrant wind lingered in the air, and clouds filled the sky. Many heaven immortals stood on the clouds in groups, calling out to their friends and greeting their acquaintances loudly. No one knew how long immortals had been cultivating, and usually, a secluded cultivation would last for several thousand years. Many immortals whom they were familiar with had not seen each other for several tens of thousands of years. Now that they had finally met their old friends, they were naturally in a happy mood, greeting each other. Reverend Huilin's heart sank, his immortal energy stagnated, and his mind was thrown into disorder. But soon, he thought of his trump card. After a brief moment of pondering, he sneered and returned to normal. Grinning coldly, he nodded and said, "Yuanhua always likes to take advantage of others. He, Now that he is circulating his cultivation technique and regulating his breath, do you think he can fully recover his injuries? With various thoughts and goals in mind, over 1,300 heaven immortals from Pyoyo Heavenly Realm and a few nearby heavenly realms came to the scene. Among them were even the immortal monarchs from a few nearby heavenly realms, who had brought their subordinates to watch the show excitedly. When immortals were gambling, the stakes were extremely rare immortal stones. Many of these heaven immortals were wealthy immortals, and all of them had placed at least 10 lower-grade immortal stones on the bet. Especially a few heaven immortals from Hualuo Heavenly Realm, who were trying to curry favor with Reverend Miao Miao, had placed a huge bet of 30 lower-grade immortal stones. On the other hand, the surrounding immortals were shouting excitedly. Hiding among the disciples of Yuanhua sect, Wu Qi was looking curiously at Pilgrim Gu He, who stood right next to Immortal Chuan. The other few immortal monarchs from the celestial court were either clad in Taoist outfits or the official robes of immortal officials. They were shrouded in a faint immortal glow, giving them an extraordinary bearing. On the other hand, Pilgrim Gu He had a bald head and a ring scar on his face. He was clad in a green monk robe and a pair of straw sandals, with a string of Buddhist beads the size of chicken eggs wrapped around his left wrist. He was a Buddhist cultivator with an accomplished cultivation base. Wu Qi had never thought that he would have an affinity with Pilgrim Gu He just because he gave him a glance. Wu Qi would never believe that Pilgrim Gu He was a monk in his previous life. As if he had noticed Wu Qi's gaze, Pilgrim Gu He suddenly turned to look at Wu Qi, clasped his palms together, and uttered a Buddhist mantra. Reverend Miao Miao and the other immortals nodded and smiled, agreeing to Immortal Chuan's suggestion. For those bored yet immortal immortals, if news of such a fun match were to spread out, it would be worth at least several dozens of periods of time in the long years to come. A grand event like this would bring great benefits to their reputation. Naturally, they were more than happy to be the witness. Among the over 1,000 heaven immortals, at least 90% of them were bored. Upon hearing Reverend Miao Miao's words, they immediately produced one jade slip after another with a smile on their faces, on which were recorded their bets and the amount of their bets. With Reverend Miao Miao, an immortal official of the celestial court, acting as the banker, these immortals were not afraid that they would not be able to collect their bets. Right at this moment, a sudden outburst of cries interrupted Pilgrim Gu He's chatter. Reverend Huilan's eyes went wide as he stared at Taoist Qi and cried out furiously, "Taoist Qi, where is Yuanhua?" The match between their disciples would decide the ownership of a planet with abundant energy stones that had never been mined before. It could almost determine the future development of a sect for the next 10,000 years. Over 1,300 heaven immortals had brought tens of thousands of disciples with them, as well as countless strange mounts. Some of these mounts had glowing furs, some had shiny horns, and some were treading upon strange phenomena such as water, fire, wind, and clouds. All sorts of strange phenomena filled the sky with dazzling lights. It was truly a scene of immortals, different from the world of mortals. From time to time, some immortals would fly down from the sky on clouds. Every time they did so, it would draw the exclamations and whispers of laughter from the crowd of immortals. Hearty laughter resounded through the heaven and earth. Streams of light, clouds, flood dragons, wan phoenixes, white deers, immortal cranes, heaven immortals, together with their disciples, were seen traversing across the void with their divine abilities, heading straight towards Pyoyo Heavenly Realm. Strange lights flickered in the sky, and a fragrant breeze filled the air. Some immortals who loved extravagance even spent their immortal energies to hoist palaces, pavilions, or even small mountains up into the sky, heading straight towards Pyoyo Heavenly Realm. Today was the day of the match between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect. Upon hearing the news, all the heaven immortals from Pyoyo Heavenly Realm and several dozens of nearby heavenly realms had come to Pyoyo Heavenly Realm with great interest. An ancient abode of the human race? What was that? Wu Qi quickly went through Lady Dark Goldwater's memories, but found nothing. This was the first time Wu Qi saw a cultivator from the Buddhist League in this world. Reverend Gu He was a skinny man, with a dignified and solemn face. His skin was shimmering with a faint golden gleam. Obviously, he had cultivated the Dharma body of Vajra unique to Buddhist League to a very powerful realm. Yet, the Golden Arhat of Buddhist League was one of the few existences who could fight against a powerful race like the Heavenly Dragon clan with just their fleshly bodies. Shaking his head and smiling disapprovingly, Reverend Huilin cupped his fist at Immortal Chuan and said, "Immortal Monarch, please be the witness for the match between our two sects." Immortal Chuan laughed out loud, then turned to Reverend Miao Miao from Hua Luo Heavenly Realm, Immortal Tsang Miao from Yuan Luo Heavenly Realm, Immortal Carefree from Mi Luo Heavenly Realm, and Reverend Guhi from Ni Luo Heavenly Realm, and said, "Fellow Immortal Monarchs, why don't we join hands to be the witness for this match? In the future, when this matter is mentioned, it will be a great story in 5 Luo Heavenly Realm." The match between the ancestral masters of two sects would decide the ownership of their sects, and it would directly determine the rise and fall of a sect. Even if they could obtain the energy stone planet, they would lose the foundation of their sects, and the decline of the sect was just around the corner. While Wu Qi was dizzy from the noise, he heard Immortal Chuan say complacently, "That's right. The venue of the life and death match between the disciples of Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect will be held at the place I've recently discovered, the ancient mansion of the human race." Wu Qi was so scared that his hair stood on end. Suddenly, he recalled the various novels he read back on Earth. Didn't all the monks in those novels do the same thing? It was easy to say that the benefactor was fated with the Buddha, and then the treasures would become their treasures, and the disciples with good aptitudes would also become their disciples. This was the most favorite trick of these bald monks. As all the immortals placed their bets, the sky was filled with streams of light. Suddenly, a strong light burst out from the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation in Puyo Heavenly Realm. Led by Taoist Qi, Immortal Green Staff, and Goddess Green Melon, all 110 cultivators from Yuanhua sect who participated in the match slowly walked out from the formation. Compared to those immortals who came to Puyo Heavenly Realm by exercising their divine abilities and Dharma spells, Yuanhua sect was keeping a very low profile. It had been a very long time since such a direct confrontation between two great immortal sects took place in the last several dozens of periods. Therefore, how could people not be curious, their blood boiling, and not rush to Puyo Heavenly Realm to watch the show? Especially the various immortal sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm, they were paying close attention to the outcome of the match. Regardless of the outcome, the overall strength of both great immortal sects would definitely be greatly affected. Perhaps, this would be the opportunity for some small immortal sects to rise to prominence. Pilgrim Guhi kept talking to Wu Qi for at least the time it took to finish a meal. Wu Qi was soaked in sweat as he listened to the conversation, and he nearly cursed out loud. "Can you stand having 10,000 flies whispering in your ears?" All the immortals smiled and nodded their heads. Apart from some heaven immortals who were on friendly terms with Huiling sect, 99% of the people did not take Reverend Huilin's words seriously. "You think Huiling sect is going to win?" "I don't think so, right?" Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect had been fighting for that energy stone planet for over 1,000 years. Yuanhua sect had only lost a group of nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples, while Huiling sect had lost an elder with an overall strength of 35th tier. Speaking of losses, Huiling sect had far more losses than Yuanhua sect. "Are you sure you can win today?" Chapter 398. These small landmasses possessed a very strong offensive and defensive strength. In fact, they were war tools created by the human race, and were called war cities. At that time, there were a total of 8 strongest war cities of the human race, named after the 8 wisest and strongest emperors of the human race, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Those war cities even had the power to fight head-on against the strongest gods of the ancient god race. Between the heavenly realms was a chaotic starry sky. It was a primordial chaos that even the great Saint Pangu could not open up. It was filled with violent energy tides that even primordial immortals dared not to step into. Energy tides of various Xiantian level would explode from time to time, and ordinary immortals would be torn to shreds by just touching a tiny bit of the energy waves. 220 cultivators from both immortal sects stepped onto their sword beams and flew towards the small landmass at top speed. Immortal Chuan pointed at the ancient mansion, smiled at Reverend Huilin, and said, with the mysterious restrictive spells on this piece of land, it can provide for the needs of several tens of heaven immortals, and several tens of thousands of cultivators. Immortal Chuan showed his teeth and smiled. His face was flushed, and he looked very proud of himself. Daoist Qi cupped his fist and said, all the disciples of Yuanhua sect are upright and aboveboard, and we never do anything shady. The few immortal monarchs and heaven immortals shook their heads indifferently, then nodded again. Carefully, Immortal Chuan led the group of immortals and opened up a small tunnel in the chaotic starry sky, traveling several tens of thousands of miles. It was just a short distance of several tens of thousands of miles, but it had already made these immortals gasp for breath, and made their faces turn pale with fear, cold sweat trickling down their backs. Wu Qi, who was pondering the stories of the ancient human race told by Immortal Chuan, nearly burst out laughing when he heard Immortal Chuan's words. This Immortal Chuan was really good at doing business. No wonder he would follow Reverend Huilin to Yuanhua sect to be the notary, and increase the bet by such a huge amount. Apparently, he was waiting for some unlucky disciple from both immortal sects to lose their important land, and then purchase this mansion filled with abundant natural energy from him. Laughing loudly, Immortal Chuan pointed his finger at the mansion. Immortal Chuan spread his arms and said with a bitter smile, if I had gained some benefits from it, I wouldn't have asked all of you to come here. Ben Jun spent several years turning over every blade of grass and every tree, but didn't find anything good. However, I don't have enough power to destroy the mansion in the core of the Forgotten Manor. Therefore, I intentionally announced it to the public. Which immortal friend has the ability to benefit from it? After this battle, you can go and try your luck. It will be a great story. Daoist Master Huilin said in a cold voice, the disciples of my Huiling sect would never do such a disgraceful thing. From afar, this small landmass looked like a delicate bonsai. There were mountains, lakes, rivers, flowers, and trees. There was even a small fireball hovering above the landmass. It revolved around the landmass like a sun, providing heat and light for the living beings on the landmass. There should be some good things in the mansion of the ancient human race. But, they were all extremely troublesome things, and were not very useful to immortal cultivators. Therefore, although the mansion was very attractive, its attraction was more in the mansion itself, not the treasures in it. However, according to the unwritten rule of immortals, since Immortal Chuan had found this mansion, all the other immortals had the right to fight for the treasures in it, but the mansion itself belonged to Immortal Chuan. If not for that, why would Immortal Chuan bring so many immortals here in such a generous manner? Suddenly, a strong natural energy came rushing at them from the front. Wu Qi and all the cultivators from Yuanhua sect had rushed into the mansion. The starry sky was filled with chaotic airflows. If an ordinary immortal accidentally let them invade his body, the effect would be no different from injecting the venom of a poisonous snake into the blood vessels of a mortal. Apart from those almighty experts who had transcended the realm of primordial immortal by cultivating innate cultivation techniques, no immortal dared to let the chaotic airflows get close to them. On top of that, the chaotic airflows were extremely heavy. Just a strand of chaotic airflow as thin as a hair was 100 times heavier than a lofty mountain. It was not hard to imagine how much immortal energy it would take to open up a safe passage in such a starry sky. As Wu Qi was flying forward while holding Princess Zhang Li's little hand, Guru Guhi's voice suddenly rang out in his ears, "Little friend, there is a fate between you and the Buddha. If you encounter any danger during the match, you just have to shout, 'Master, save me,' and I'll definitely do my best to save you. Little friend, if you join the Buddhist League, you will find endless happiness. If you are willing to cultivate in seclusion, there are countless beautiful sceneries in the land of ultimate bliss. If you are interested in dual cultivation, there is also the Great Joy Zen technique in the Buddhist League. I have a senior brother who is an outstanding talent in that technique. I can let you join his sect." After entering the spherical space, all the immortals breathed out a heavy sigh of relief and felt completely at ease. It made sense, as the natural energy in the vicinity of the mansion was really rich, even much richer than that of Myriad Immortals' planet. Although the landmass was a little smaller, the density of natural energy was very high. If one were to compare it seriously, the total amount of natural energy here was about the same as that of Green Cliff Planet. If either Huiling sect or Yuanhua sect were to lose their headquarters today, this ancient mansion could really serve as a temporary shelter for them. In the ancient times, it was before the establishment of the Celestial Court. At that time, the ancient gods were still the rulers of the heaven and earth, while the human race was rising rapidly. Under the leadership of the human emperor, the human race used a mystic technique to take down the fragments of Panga continent, creating a small landmass like the one in front of them, allowing them to roam the sky above the human race's territory. Right in the center of the landmass, between the mountains and the shores of lakes, the ruins of a few cities could be vaguely seen. Originally, these cities were very large in scale, with city walls measuring several tens of miles in both width and length, and standing over 100 feet tall. It was not hard to tell how magnificent these cities were in the past. But now, these city walls had collapsed to the ground, and all that was left of the houses in the cities were broken walls. The few cities were filled with an air of dilapidation. After that, the heaven and earth fell into chaos. When he said this, Immortal Chuan's description was a little vague. Clearly, he did not know much about this period of history. In short, the human race eventually became the rulers of the heaven and earth, while the immortals soared above the 9 heavens. On the other hand, the war cities of the human race that once roamed the universe were either destroyed or lost in the vast chaotic starry sky, drifting aimlessly in all directions. Instinctively, Wuqi exercised his mystic eyes of universe and gave the surroundings a glance, and he nearly let out a cry. Beside him, Reverend Miao Miao said with a smile, "In short, we have to fight with our true strength, and no cheating is allowed." In this era where natural energy was scarce and resources were scarce, an ancient mansion that could absorb chaotic airflow and transform it into natural energy was a great temptation to all the immortal sections. If Immortal Chuan auctioned it, he could get a lot of benefits. The group of immortals stared quietly at the small landmass. Reverend Miao Miao said with a half-joking and half-serious tone, "Immortal Chuan, I suppose you must have obtained countless benefits from discovering this ancient mansion? Ha ha ha, I wonder if you can show it to us." Immortal Chuan continued, "In this life and death match, neither side is allowed to use immortal-grade talismans, immortal-grade thunderbolts, or any other consumable offensive magical treasures. Otherwise, they will lose on the spot. Medicinal pills and demon pets are allowed to be used. Of course, fellow immortals, with your keen eyes, if any one of you uses a demon pet whose overall strength does not match its master's, we, the few of us, will judge the immortal sect he belongs to as the loser." A bright flame flickered in the void, stretching for several tens of miles. Immortal Chuan and the other 4 immortal monarchs led the group of immortal officials to clear a path in the front. All the heaven immortals exerted their powers at the same time, forming a long stream of light that flew at top speed in the void. In just a blink of an eye, they had traveled tens of millions of miles, and very soon, they arrived at the edge of Puyo Heavenly Realm. Reverend Huilan's lips twitched as he gave Immortal Chuan a glance. After advancing carefully for several tens of thousands of miles, a spherical space with the diameter of about 10,000 miles suddenly appeared amidst the tumbling void. An enormous restrictive force had opened up such a safe space in this chaotic starry sky, which was filled with rich natural energy. A strange golden light filled the surroundings, as a small landmass, measuring about 1,000 miles in both width and length, was hovering quietly in front of them. Everyone's attention was attracted by this space. When no one was paying attention, Wuqi nimbly threw something to the side. Narrowing his eyes, Wuqi knew that Lady Dark Goldwater was an idiot who only focused on cultivation, and knew nothing about anything else. Therefore, she did not have any impression of a mansion of the human race in her memory. Shaking his head, Wuqi turned to Immortal Green Staff and asked in a low voice, "Ancestral Master, what is the origin of this mansion of the human race?" The restrictive force that opened up this spherical space in the chaotic starry sky was coming from the core of that landmass. Chaotic airflows kept rushing into this space, and were transformed by the restrictive force into the normal natural energies of 5 elements. A rich natural energy kept bursting out from the landmass, and the surrounding spherical space seemed to be expanding slowly. All the immortals on the scene had sharp ears. Upon hearing Wu Qi's question, Immortal Chuan turned to give Wu Qi a look. When he found out that Wu Qi was the young man who had given him a large sum of bribes, he immediately had a good impression of him. Immortal Chuan nodded amiably, smiled and said, "If that is the case, I'll tell you the origin of this mansion of the human race. Fellow immortals have brought quite a number of juniors here, and it is a good thing to let them gain some knowledge." Upon hearing Immortal Chuan's words, the group of immortals became excited like flies who had smelled the scent of blood. They fixed their eyes on the disciples of 2 immortal sects, secretly calculating the chances of winning. The sound of a jade bell rang out, as Immortal Chuan smiled and said, "That will be the best. Disciples of Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect, quickly enter the mansion. The match will officially begin at noon 3 days later. During this period of time, you can familiarize yourselves with the terrain, adjust your aura, or simply try your luck and see if you can find some good treasures." Pilgrim Gu He's nagging kept buzzing in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean like a fly that could not be killed. Helpless, Wu Qi rolled his eyes and sealed off all his 6 senses. Only then did he manage to isolate himself from Pilgrim Gu He's nagging. Some of these mansions had drifted into the depths of the vast and immeasurable chaotic starry sky, while some had drifted for countless years due to the chaotic tide. Occasionally, they would be pushed close to a heavenly realm, and sometimes, they would even break into the normal starry sky of a heavenly realm. Whenever this happened, the lucky immortal monarch in charge of the heavenly realm would receive an unexpected windfall. The price of a mansion was indeed not cheap. Smiling, Immortal Chuan clapped his hands and said, "Come, come. Fellow immortal monarchs, today is the day of the match between Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect. For the sake of a planet of energy stones, both immortal sects will each send out 10 nascent divinity cultivators and 100 nascent soul cultivators to fight in this mansion. No matter what, the disciple of whichever sect can walk out from this mansion in the end will be able to occupy the planet of energy stones for himself." Immortal Chuan nodded his head reservedly, then began to tell them about the origin of the mansion of the human race. Chapter 399. With his cultivation base skyrocketing, Wu Qi exercised his mystic eyes of universe, and could see every single blade of grass and every tree on this vast landmass. Just as Immortal Chuan had said, he didn't find any benefits in this place, because Wu Qi had also discovered that all the flowers, grasses, and trees on this landmass were ordinary species, and not even a single ginseng could be found. Even if these ordinary flowers, grasses, and trees had absorbed more natural energies over the years, what was the point? Not to mention that these plants had not absorbed much natural energies. Although the natural energies in the vicinity of this landmass were very rich, the natural energies on this landmass were very sparse. Through the observation of Wu Qi's mystic eyes of universe, he could see a grayish-white beam of light was absorbing the natural energies in the vicinity at the core of this landmass, which was also the source of the powerful restrictive spells. The restrictive spells of the ancient mansion were very magical, as they could transform the chaotic airflows into natural energies of the 5 elements and release them. Meanwhile, the grayish-white beam of light was absorbing a large amount of natural energies emitted by this landmass. However, it was obvious that this grayish-white beam of light had developed a preliminary spirituality, as it was absorbing natural energies at a certain speed, which didn't affect the operation of the restrictive spells of the ancient mansion. On top of that, it was still able to support the continuous expansion of the spherical space around the mansion. The larger the spherical space was, the larger its surface area would be, and the larger its contact with the chaotic airflows would be. Thus, it would be able to absorb and transform more chaotic airflows. This grayish-white beam of light was very clever. It absorbed 70% of the natural energies transformed by the restrictive spells, and used the remaining 20% to maintain the operation of the restrictive spells. Meanwhile, it released the remaining 10% of natural energies, which gradually expanded the spherical space around it. When Wu Qi's mystic eyes of universe swept across the grayish-white beam of light, his heart began to race. This was the innate yin energy of yin and yang, the purest yin energy among the innate yin and yang energies, the source of all the yin energy in the world. The innate chaos was transformed into yin and yang, and the so-called taiji transformed into yin and yang. The grayish-white light was the innate yin qi in the yin and yang qi. It was also one of the two yin qi that Wu Qi needed to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique, which was the next cultivation method of the 7 foundation building technique. Originally, the scroll of stealing had recorded some places that produced innate energies. However, those places were either very far away from the Puyo heavenly realm where Wu Qi was now, and Wu Qi did not have the ability to go there, or they were located in some extremely dangerous places, where even if Wu Qi went there, he would be turned into ashes in a puff of smoke. Therefore, Wu Qi was so happy to be able to find a wisp of innate yin qi here that he almost shouted out loud. However, under the watchful eyes of all the immortals, over 1,000 heaven immortals were using their dharma eyes to observe every move made by Wu Qi and his companions. Their powerful divine will had locked down everything around them, so how could Wu Qi have the chance to collect the innate yin energy? But, without the innate yin energy, how was Wu Qi going to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique to the next level? Currently, he had 10 innate nascent souls in his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and the 7 foundation elevating technique required him to shatter these nascent souls, fuse them with the innate yin and yang energies, and eventually form an innate nascent divinity. No matter what, Wu Qi had to get his hands on this yin energy. His eyes darting from side to side, Wu Qi pulled Princess Zhang Li's tender hand and landed on the ground. The place where Yuanhua sect's disciples landed was next to a small lake. It was a place with lush water plants and beautiful sceneries, making it a good place to set up camp. All the disciples of Yuanhua sect who participated in the life and death match were from White Cloud Immortal sect, and 70% of them had the surname Jiang. All of them were blood relatives of the same clan, and with the elders of Jiang clan taking care of them, they moved in an orderly manner. Very soon, they began to deploy various defensive mechanisms and traps around the lake. Several hundred miles away, the group of over 100 disciples from Huiling sect was divided into 5 groups, obviously led by 5 peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators. They were noisy when they moved, and only after a full 15 minutes after they landed on the ground did they begin to slowly deploy all kinds of defensive formations under the command of a nascent divinity cultivator who was appointed as the leader. However, it was obvious that there was a grudge between the people of these 5 factions, as their cooperation was sloppy, and their efficiency was shockingly low. High up in the sky, Daoist Qi nodded his head happily and said with a smile, "We now have 70% chance of winning." Meanwhile, Reverend Huilan's face was extremely unsightly. He gave a fierce glare at Immortal Kuhi, who was standing next to him with an unsightly expression, and scolded him with a voice transmission, "So, these are the good disciples you found? Look at them, then look at those Yuanhua sect disciples on the opposite side. If not because I have the confidence to defeat that old fart Yuanhua, wouldn't our sect have lost a treasured planet of energy stones for no reason?" Immortal Kuhi bowed his head helplessly with a long face. He also found it strange that all the disciples of Yuanhua sect who participated in the life and death match were so obedient. Under the lead of a cultivator, all of them were doing what they were supposed to do, just like a group of filial sons and grandsons carrying out tasks assigned by their patriarch. Immortal Kuhi did not expect that his guess was right. The leader of Yuanhua sect's disciples in this life and death match was Jiang Xiaoxiao, a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator, commonly known as Daoist Xiao. Furthermore, 70% of the disciples of Jiang clan were his sons and grandsons. As for the other 30% who were not from Jiang clan, most of them had the surname Lu. However, Lu Wuyue, Jiang Xiaoxiao's partner in dual cultivation, was the patriarch of these Lu clansmen, and she was also one of the 10 peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators sent by Yuanhua sect in this life and death match. With her around, all the cultivators with the surname Lu were naturally very obedient. In less than 2 hours, while the disciples of Huiling sect were still idling, under the command of Daoist Xiao and Lu Wuyue, Wu Qi and the others had already constructed a city made of clay, measuring about 1 mile in both width and length. It was surrounded by countless restrictive formations, forming a powerful defensive and early warning system. When everything was done, Daoist Xiao, who always wore a smile on his face, cried out loudly, "Disciples of Yuanhua sect, listen up. Build your own tents, circulate your energy, and regulate your breath. 3 days later, we will fight a life and death match with the disciples of Huiling sect." All the disciples of Yuanhua sect answered at the same time. Right in the middle of the city made of clay, they pulled out the white tents they brought with them and pitched several dozens of tents according to the positions of the 8 trigrams. After that, they hid in the tents and began to regulate their breath, trying their best to adjust themselves to the best condition. The group of immortals hovering in the sky shook their heads and shifted their attention away from the disciples of Yuanhua sect, turning to look at the 110 disciples of Huiling sect with a smile on their faces. These people were still weakly deploying formations and traps. However, the gaps between the various formations they deployed were large enough for a horse to run, and no one knew what the purpose of these restrictive formations was. Some immortals who were not very kind suddenly burst into loud laughter. Without giving any face to Reverend Huilin, they began to make comments on these disciples of Huiling sect who were going to participate in the tournament. There were even some immortals who were mean by nature who simply grabbed their own disciples, using the vastly different performance of the disciples of Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect as a teaching material to teach their own disciples a lesson, telling them that they must live in harmony and be as smart and capable as the disciples of Yuanhua sect, and that they must never be like those useless fools from Huiling sect. Reverend Huilin's face turned uglier and uglier. Gradually, his eyes were filled with pale golden blood veins, as he stared at immortal Kuhi furiously. If he knew this was going to be such a disgrace, he would have asked his own disciples from Huiling sect to participate in the battle. However, those nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples of Huiling sect had suffered a great loss in the battle with Yuanhua sect. Left with no other choice, immortal Kuhi had to find a group of outer sect disciples as his disciples. These disciples were the disciples of 4 outer sect disciples, together with a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect, and over 20 cultivators led by a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect. But obviously, such a hodgepodge of disciples was not as strong as the disciples of Yuanhua sect. Jiang Yun. How could that young fellow bring up such a group of obedient and capable disciples? Reverend Huilin's heart felt heavy. For the first time in his life, he was not optimistic about the future of Huiling sect. It was a sign of prosperity for Yuanhua sect to have such smart, capable, obedient, and organized disciples. On the other hand, why did the disciples of Huiling sect seem to be in a state of decline? On the other hand, those heaven immortals who were part of the top 10 sects in Puyo heavenly realm, like Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect, were thoughtfully sizing up the disciples of the 2 immortal sections. Their eyes were flickering. Obviously, their attitude towards Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect would undergo a subtle change in the future. Pulling Princess Zhang Li's hand, Wu Qi squeezed into a spacious and lofty tent. After that, without saying anything, he put his arms around Princess Zhang Lu and gave her a deep kiss. As Wu Qi's eyes flickered, Princess Zhang Lu, who was very familiar with Wu Qi, widened her eyes and rolled her pretty eyes. Then, cooperatively, she tangled her warm little tongue with Wu Qi's. As the 2 of them did this, the few strands of divine sense that were left on their bodies immediately moved away. All the heaven immortals present were reputable figures, and they would never do something like peeping on their juniors. Even if there were some people with bad conduct who liked to do such a thing, they would never make a fool of themselves in front of so many people of similar status. Therefore, with just a deep kiss, Wu Qi had created an excellent condition for himself. With a sway of his body, Wu Qi took a step back, drilling into the ground like a stream of water. A celestial fiend puppet squeezed out of the ground and transformed into Wu Qi's appearance, sitting cross-legged on the ground while groaning, discussing some superficial Tao of talismans with Princess Zhanglu. Princess Zhanglu was sitting cross-legged in front of the puppet, pretending to be discussing some superficial Tao of talismans. Exercising an innate escape art, Wu Qi smoothly avoided 19 layers of defensive mechanisms, and quickly approached the core of the landmass, where a cave abode was excavated underground. This was the cave abode that Immortal Chuan said he could not break. The last few layers of defensive mechanisms in the cave abode were indeed very powerful, and extremely complicated. Wu Qi could see through the ins and outs of these restrictive spells, but he really did not have the ability to open them. Perhaps, the person who constructed them had an overall strength equivalent to an upper-tier gold immortal. There was no way Wu Qi could break them. For example, Wu Qi knew that he could blow up a stone wall with explosives, but his strength was only equivalent to 1 or 2 grams of explosives. He could only blow up stones for fun, and could not do anything to a stone wall that was 1,000 feet thick. In the face of such powerful defensive mechanisms, one would need a very strong cultivation base to break them. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi carefully hid himself outside one of the powerful defensive mechanisms, releasing just a tiny bit of his innate 5 elements aura. Abruptly, the innate yin energy hidden in the core of the cave abode moved, transforming into a beam of white light and piercing through the layers of defensive mechanisms effortlessly, quickly coming before Wu Qi. After briefly sensing the aura emanated from Wu Qi, the innate yin energy fused into Wu Qi's body without hesitation. A stream of cold air flowed through his body. Wu Qi took a deep breath and carefully exercised the 7 foundation establishment technique, guiding the innate yin energy into the innate yin meridians in his arms, making it stay there safely. Right after the innate yin energy fused with the yin meridians, all the energy in Wu Qi's body began to surge like a rioting mob. Chapter 400. As soon as the innate yin energy entered his body, Wu Qi's fleshly body, which was tempered by the mystic technique of scroll of stealing, immediately went through a tremendous transformation. Every single cell in his body was cheering as they absorbed the subtle aura emanating from the yin energy. In just a brief moment, Wu Qi's body, which had become sharp because of practicing the flood dragon transformation technique, and his bulging muscles, had suddenly become smooth, and harmonious. An endless stream of yin energy was flowing and circulating in Wu Qi's body. With a slight twist of his body, Wu Qi's body began to twist and wriggle like water. He took a deep breath, and his body became as hard as steel, while his muscles began to bulge out from under his skin. The innate yin energy was circulating crazily in his body. As the innate yin energy was the most restrained, Wu Qi's innate energies of 5 elements were shrinking rapidly like mud under a 10,000-ton hydraulic press. In just the time of 2 to 3 breaths, the innate energies that filled all the meridians in Wu Qi's body had been compressed to 1/10 of their original volume. The energy contained in each unit of innate energies had increased by 10 times. Perhaps the power of an ordinary fire-thunder spell cast by Wu Qi was comparable to the Raging Thunderstrike, which was unleashed by a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator by consuming a huge amount of energy. On top of that, as the innate yin energy was restrained and hidden, Wu Qi's aura had also become faintly discernible, and was even comparable to that of an ordinary human. It was stated in the scroll of stealing that only when one had absorbed the innate yin energy, could all the escape techniques of hiding one's whereabouts in the scroll of stealing be cultivated to the ultimate stage. Now, even if Wu Qi did not use the mystic technique to restrain his aura, as long as he walked into a crowd of mortals, ordinary immortals would think that he was just a mortal. Feeling the magical transformation in his body, Wu Qi shook his head in a happy yet troubled manner, and breathed out a long sigh. His innate energies had been reduced by 90%. Even with the speed of his 10 nascent souls breathing at the same time, it would still take him some time to replenish the consumed innate energies. Of course, this was a good thing. But after a few days of hard work, his meridians would be filled up again. Unwilling to give up, Wu Qi looked at the ancient restrictive spell that was emitting a faint bronze light like an iron wall in front of him. He shook his head and quickly returned to the ground. The scroll of stealing did mention all sorts of tricks to solve this kind of restrictive spell that was left behind from the ancient times. However, currently, Wu Qi did not have the ability to break it, so he could only look at it and sigh. But with this innate yin qi, it was worth it, everything was worth it. As long as he could find the innate yin and yang qi, he would be able to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique, using the innate yin and yang qi as the heaven and earth furnace and his own body as the cauldron, crushing his nascent soul that contained his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and forging his innate nascent divinity in an unprecedented way. An innate primordial spirit that had fused with the innate yin and yang and the 5 elements was an existence comparable to an immortal soul. Once his innate primordial spirit was formed, Wu Qi had officially embarked on a path of cultivation that was completely different from the current cultivation world. The end of this path would lead straight to the true great Tao of the heaven and earth, but it would depend on whether Wu Qi had the luck to reach that point. As the innate yin qi entered his body, the hasek in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean let out a joyful sigh and said, "Little fellow, your luck is really wonderful. Perhaps I should address you as master in advance. As long as you possess the overall strength of a gold immortal, I'll be at your beck and call, and I'll never regret it." Carefully and stealthily, the hasek extracted a thread of the innate yin qi that was flowing in Wu Qi's body. After that, it let out a joyful cry and fused the extremely magical energy into its own soul, then fell into a deep sleep comfortably in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. To Wu Qi, the loss of this thread of innate yin qi was nothing. The innate yin qi that had fused with his 7 profound yin meridians was constantly absorbing the innate energy essence exhaled by Wu Qi's nascent soul, transforming it into new innate yin qi. Bringing with him a comfortable and cool feeling, Wu Qi leaped back to the ground, and soundlessly fused with the celestial fiend puppet. He smiled and nodded at Princess Zhanglu, then pulled her hand. Once again, both of them were entangled with each other. Once again, several dozens of divine wills swept across the tent, then quickly retreated as if they had just seen a ghost. 3 days later, these immortals no longer sent their divine wills near Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli's tent. The small fireball hovered high up in the sky, and everyone's shadows were right under their feet. Noon had arrived. Immortal Chuan's loud cry was heard coming from the void. "The life and death match between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect has officially begun. The winner of both sides will occupy that energy stone planet. In this match, no one-time use items such as talismans or even thunder bombs are allowed to be used, and there are no other restrictions. In the end, the immortal sect with a disciple who survived will be the winner." Daoist Xiao gave a long and sonorous cry, shooting up into the sky together with a green sword beam. Looking at the direction where the disciples of Huiling sect had set up their camp, he cried out sternly, "Fellow Taoists from Huiling sect, is there anyone who dares to fight me?" It was just a distance of several hundred miles. Even though some cultivators did not have the ability to see through this distance with naked eyes, the divine will of peak stage nascent soul cultivators was more than enough to cover this space. Therefore, when Daoist Xiao shouted out his challenge, several dozens of divine wills from Huiling sect had already enveloped the area. All the disciples of Yuanhua sect who were participating in the life and death match flew up into the sky. Lu Wuyue, who had white hair but a face as beautiful as a young girl, hovered side by side in midair with Daoist Xiao. Laughing loudly, she said, "I'm Wuyue. Is there any fellow Daoist who is willing to give me some advice?" The other 8 peak stage nascent divinity cultivators of Yuanhua sect flew up into the sky one after another, hovering in midair and shouting, "We'll be waiting for you, fellow Taoists." Before their voices could fade away, a loud boom of wind and flame was heard coming from a distance. A small hill, about 1 mile tall and several miles in circumference, suddenly left the ground and flew up into the sky. The underside of the hill was surrounded by a strong, pitch-black wind, while a raging fire was burning on top of it. The scorching temperature of the flame turned the entire hill red, as if it would melt at any time. Large fireballs broke off from the hill and fell down, flying at top speed towards Wu Qi and his company, bringing with them a strong gust of wind. It took the time it took to finish a meal to fly tens of miles high up into the sky, and only then did it arrive above the earthen city built by Wu Qi and his company. The strong, dark wind under the hill dissipated abruptly, and the hill began to fall back down. A bright red light towered up into the sky from the top of the hill, and a great amount of heat burst out from the red flame. It made Wu Qi and his company feel as if they were in a furnace. While Daoist Xiao and his company were about to fight back, Lord Xianqing had already cried out joyfully, "Fellow disciples, let this little dragon show me what he is capable of." Laughing wildly, Lord Xianqing suddenly transformed into his true form of a flood dragon. A black flood dragon mixed with some golden scales soared up into the sky, his over 3,000 feet long body wriggling up into the sky, then slapped forcefully on the hill with one of his claws. A tremendous hidden force exploded out, and the magic power attached to the hill was shattered by the claw. The huge hill was sent flying backward for some distance, and was about to fall down to the ground. But before the hill could fall, Lord Xianqing had already opened his mouth and recited a few incantations. A tornado rose from the lake next to him, rolling up the flaming hill and sending it flying towards Huiling Sec's base. The speed of the tornado was a few times faster than the dark gale coming from underneath the small hill. Within the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the small hill had arrived right above the Huiling Sec's base. Along with a wild whistling noise, the rapidly spinning small hill smashed down forcefully. The wind had fanned the flames, and more than half of the hill had been melted. Just when a few nascent soul disciples of Huiling sect sprung up into the sky, preparing to roll the hill back like Lord Xianqing did, Lord Xianqing suddenly glared at them and unleashed an invisible force. The hill exploded abruptly, turning into several hundred huge balls of lava and falling down to the ground. Deafening booms of explosions echoed out one after another, as Huiling sect's base suddenly turned into a sea of flames. Columns of flame and smoke that reached several miles high could be seen everywhere. The result of Huiling sect's disciples slacking off and not meticulously constructing their defensive system was now reflected, as nearly half of their defensive formations were destroyed by Lord Xianqing with just one attack. 7 early-stage nascent soul disciples of Huiling sect were knocked flying away by the explosion. Their defensive magical treasures were ripped to shreds, and blood was spraying all over their bodies. Suddenly, a huge catfish flood dragon sprung down from the sky. The catfish flood dragon, who had grown to over 3,000 feet long, opened her mouth and swallowed the 7 nascent soul cultivators. After that, she opened her mouth and sprayed out a stream of black water, pushing the dozens of nascent soul cultivators far away. Their defensive magical treasures flickered and flickered, producing a series of explosive noises. Wu Qi shook his head as he watched. As Patriarch Yuanhua feared that his disciples would suffer a loss, he had given each of them a middle-grade spirit weapon and a lower-grade defensive outfit. Now, all the cultivators on the scene were equipped with 2 spirit items, and their overall offensive and defensive strength had improved by at least a few times. But, what was going on with Huiling sect? They were all shabby lower-grade and middle-grade magical treasures, the kind that were poorly crafted. But, after being smashed by Lord Xianqing and Catfish Flood Dragon, they were actually thrown into confusion. While Wu Qi was shaking his head and sighing, the nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling sect finally struck. 10 beams of cold light shot out, flying straight towards Lord Xianqing and Catfish Flood Dragon. Judging from the luster of the beams and the faintly discernible spirit pressure, it was obvious that they were 10 spirit items. Wu Qi nodded his head inwardly. That made sense. How could Huiling sect be so poor? Perhaps it was because Reverend Huilin was too stingy. High up in the sky, Reverend Huilin's face turned unsightly. He was indeed too stingy, as he had only given 10 nascent divinity disciples a set of excellent spirit items, and ignored all the nascent soul disciples who participated in the match. In his opinion, it was these 10 nascent divinity disciples who would decide the outcome of the match, and those nascent soul disciples were just cannon fodders who could buy time. Why would they be given excellent spirit items? As the nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling sect struck, Catfish Flood Dragon and Lord Xianqing, Chi-Chi, let out a dragon roar as they stepped on dark clouds and retreated at top speed. Lord Xianqing opened his mouth and sprayed out several dozens of layers of water shields in front of him. Meanwhile, Catfish Flood Dragon kept spraying out black waves of water. The waves brought with them a bone-piercing coldness and smashed onto the bright beams formed by the spirit items, sending up a large sheet of cold air. In just a few blinks of an eye, Catfish Flood Dragon and Lord Xianqing were forced to flee. Together with 8 other peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators, Daoist Xiao and Lu Weiyue hastily charged forward, while the rest of Yuanhua sect's cultivators formed into formations and charged forward as well. Wu Qi let out a long cry as he excitedly pulled Princess Zhang Li's little hand and rushed forward. The spirit breeding ring flickered with a bright light, as Gold Horn and Silver Horn rushed out with a deafening hiss. 2 beams of red and white intertwined with each other as they shot out. A miserable howl echoed out as a nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect had his body pierced through. All the immortals in the sky looked over in horror, while Reverend Huilin cried out wildly, "Cheater! That guy cheated!" Chapter 401. This doesn't make sense. Absolutely not. Reverend Huilin cried out with his saliva flying all over the place, 5 immortal monarchs, please be careful. The pair of wings on the back of these 2 great pythons is definitely an ancient bloodline. Given their huge size, they are definitely flood dragons, and they have formed their nascent divinities. They are 2 demon immortals of nascent divinity realm. How could a mere nascent soul disciple own such demon pets? Cheating. They are definitely the left hand of Yuanhua sect. Reverend Huilin said with a righteous tone, they know they cannot defeat us, Huiling sect. That's why they resorted to such a dirty trick. While Reverend Huilin was shouting and protesting, Gold Horn and Silver Horn had already shot out dozens of red and white beams in a row, killing 7 nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling sect on the spot, while the other 3 were covered in wounds and looked like they were going to fall to the ground soon. Even Daoist Mo Wan's Smoke One shield could not withstand the raging flame and cold beams unleashed by the brothers, let alone the spirit items controlled by these nascent divinity cultivators. Wherever the red and white beams went, spirit items were broken and fleshly bodies were damaged. Gold Horn and Silver Horn had shown their mighty power, causing Huiling sect's cultivators to flee with their arms around their heads, blood and flesh flying in all directions. The brothers and Catfish Flood Dragon opened their big mouths and kept swallowing the blood and flesh that filled the sky. They seemed to be enjoying the feast, but little did they know that Reverend Huilin was already protesting loudly from above. Nevertheless, Reverend Huilin was just protesting, as he was too lazy to save his disciples. What a bunch of useless fools. Let them all die. As long as he could confirm that Yuanhua sect's cultivators were cheating, Huiling sect would win the match. So, what if a few of their disciples died? Wu Qi followed closely behind Gold Horn and Silver Horn. 2 flying swords wheeled and danced in the air, emanating a large sheet of dark light. All of a sudden, a sword beam flashed, as it pierced through the defensive magical treasure of an early-stage nascent soul cultivator in front of him, piercing through his forehead. Suddenly, Gold Horn rushed up, coiled his long tongue, and swallowed the early-stage nascent soul cultivator into his stomach. Initially, Wu Qi only had the sword of Greedy Wolf. However, as he was appreciated by Patriarch Yuanhua, he was given a flying sword of upper-grade spirit item level, the Xuanhao. This flying sword was made from the cold jade of the seabed and tempered with 10,000 years of Xian Bing. It was a pure Yin water attribute flying sword. Just now, Wu Qi had obtained the innate Yin Qi, and the 5 elements energy in his body carried a trace of extreme Yin aura. Coupled with the sword-controlling method in the Xianyin water scripture, he could control the Xuanhao sword with ease and fluency. The sword of Greedy Wolf darted back and forth, clashing head-on with the flying swords of those Huiling sect cultivators. Every single time, it would break the flying swords and magical treasures of those Huiling sect cultivators. As for the Xuanhao sword, it brought up a large waterfall and created several tens of large and small whirlpools in the air, pulling all the cultivators of Huiling sect into them one after another. The huge Yin force silently twisted and pressed down, crushing the defensive treasures of those cultivators, or those nascent soul cultivators themselves, who could not bear the huge pressure, fainted with blood flowing out of their 7 orifices. No matter it was those cultivators whose defensive magical treasures were destroyed, or those who fainted, they would end up in the stomachs of Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Catfish Flood Dragon. However, the one who was even more efficient than Wu Qi was Princess Zhang Lu. A five-colored divine gleam flickered in her eyes, while an invisible force kept echoing in the air. From time to time, cultivators of Huiling sect would be controlled by Princess Zhanglu with a mystic technique, and obediently put away their defensive magical treasures. Therefore, in broad daylight, there would be a perfect thunderbolt striking down from the sky, striking the dazed cultivator and turning him half-cooked, while emitting an aroma of human flesh that could make one's scalp go numb. On the contrary, these cultivators who were struck by thunderbolts were especially welcomed by Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Later on, the two brothers would spend a lot of time around Princess Zhanglu, snatching and devouring these half-cooked cultivators. In just 15 minutes, the disciples of Huiling sect had suffered a crushing defeat, as over 70 of them were killed by Yuanhua sect's swords. However, when they fought back before their death, they were all blocked by the lower-grade defensive spirit items carried by Yuanhua sect's disciples. Even after fighting for so long, not a single Yuanhua sect disciple had a scratch on their skin. Reverend Huilin cried out sternly in the sky, "5 immortal monarchs, the evidence is conclusive, and the facts are clear. Yuanhua sect's disciples are cheating." All the immortals nearby looked at Reverend Huilin contemptuously. "Since you know Yuanhua sect's disciples are cheating, why didn't you save your own disciples first? After all, they are the disciples of Huiling sect. If you were to rescue them, you would at most lose a dozen of your men, unlike now, where most of them have been slaughtered by Wu Qi and his men, and only about 20 lucky disciples are still fleeing in panic." All the heaven immortals present could tell that Reverend Huilin was intentionally using the flesh and blood of his own disciples to strengthen his persuasion. The more disciples who were like ants were killed, the more sympathy Reverend Huilin would receive. Perhaps, the 5 immortal monarchs who acted as the judges would have their hearts softened, and declare Yuanhua sect to have lost the match. Of course, as the immortal monarchs of the celestial court, Reverend Huilin did not consider the possibility of their hearts softening. In any case, he just wanted to let all the immortals present here have a good look at how a nascent soul disciple of Yuanhua sect had actually released 2 nascent divinity ancient pythons to participate in the match. According to the rules agreed upon beforehand, this was cheating. And cheating would result in a loss. There was one more thing that Reverend Huilin did not say out loud, and perhaps he was too embarrassed to say it out loud. All the disciples chosen by Huiling sect's disciples are elites who are 1 in 10 million. If not for Wu Qi's cheating, there is no way Huiling sect would have lost the match. However, when Reverend Huilin looked at the shabby lower-grade magical treasures of his own disciples, looked at the lower-grade spirit item outfits worn by Yuanhua sect's disciples, and looked at how they were controlling those powerful spirit items as nimbly as fishes swimming in the water, no matter how thick his face was, he was too embarrassed to say those words out loud. Daoist Qi sneered and said, "Senior Huilin, I'll address you as senior here. But, I hope senior will not speak carelessly and accuse Yuanhua sect for no reason. Those 2 great pythons are indeed the demon pets subdued by our disciple, Wu Qi. Half a month ago, they transcended their heavenly tribulation in Green Cliff Mountain and formed their nascent divinities. Yuanhua sect is not cheating." Not allowing Reverend Huilin to say anything, Daoist Qi sneered and said, "The few immortal monarchs have agreed upon the rules of the match. How could Yuanhua sect be so stupid to do something as foolish as putting themselves in a desperate situation and giving others a handle?" Immortal Chuan pondered for a brief moment, then exchanged a glance with the few immortal monarchs standing next to him, then nodded slightly at the same time. Reverend Gu He gave a loud laugh, then suddenly raised his hand and drew a line in the air. A beam of golden Buddhist light shot down like a wall, crossing the landmass underneath and separating Wu Qi and the disciples of Huiling sect. With a deep voice, Reverend Gu He cried out, "Buddha is merciful. Yuanhua sect has gained an absolute advantage in the first match today. There is no reason for us to kill anymore. Let's call it a day." Reverend Gu He only said that Yuanhua sect had gained an absolute advantage, but he did not say that Yuanhua sect had won the match. Obviously, he wanted to check the relationship between Gold Horn and Silver Horn, as well as Wu Qi. He wanted to make sure that Yuanhua sect did not cheat, only then he could decide the outcome of the match. At this point in time, only 3 nascent divinity cultivators were left standing among the disciples of Huiling's sect. However, they were all covered in blood. Reverend Gu He stepped forward and separated both sides. Immediately, the 3 nascent divinity cultivators from Huiling's sect fell to the ground, panting like mortals. One after another, all the immortals descended to the ground, surrounding Gold Horn and Silver Horn curiously. They were frowning, and some of them even stole glances at Wu Qi with different thoughts in their minds. Wu Qi could sense the malice in these people's hearts, and he knew that they were coveting Gold Horn and Silver Horn. However, Wu Qi was not afraid of them. As long as he did not leave Green Cliff Planet easily, who could touch even a single hair of his? Immortal Chuan took a few rounds around Gold Horn and Silver Horn, nodded his head, and said with a smile, "They are indeed extraordinary. I think these 2 strange pythons are the legendary dragon pythons of fire and ice, right? I've read about them in the rare books found in the Celestial Court. Little friend Wu Qi, what a great fortune you have." Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to the Reverend, then said with a deep voice, "You flatter me, immortal monarch. Wu Qi is just lucky." Knowing what these immortals wanted to investigate, Wu Qi beckoned at Gold Horn and Silver Horn, then said with a smile, "Gold Horn, Silver Horn, reveal your nascent divinity, and let these senior immortals see the relationship between you and me." With a sway of his body, a large sheet of clouds rushed out from around him, and a white cloud carried Wu Qi's fake nascent soul as it flew out. As this fake nascent soul was cultivating White Cloud Immortal Sex Energy Unity Mystic Technique, it was surrounded by a large sheet of light clouds. In the hands of the fake nascent soul, there were 2 beams of red and white light hovering in midair. Gold Horn and Silver Horn bowed their heads. A beam of red and a beam of white light shot out from between their brows, transforming into the shadows of 2 great pythons and slithering quickly around Wu Qi. Gold Horn and Silver Horn's nascent divinity was strong and ferocious. One was shrouded in raging flame, while the other was shrouded in icy wind. Inside and outside their nascent divinities, countless restrictive runes could be vaguely seen. As all the heaven immortals were experts in this field, they could tell with just one glance that Gold Horn and Silver Horn's nascent divinities were resonating with the light on Wu Qi's palms. Obviously, their nascent divinities were completely controlled by Wu Qi. Reverend Huilin cried out sternly, "This does not prove that Wu Qi has subdued these 2 great pythons." Wu Qi sighed, shook his head and said, "I can swear to the heaven that Gold Horn and Silver Horn are demon pets that I personally subdued. Actually, if Gold Horn and Silver Horn were demon immortals of Heaven Immortal Realm, Wu Qi would be suspected of cheating. However, they had just formed their nascent divinities, and all the senior immortals could tell with just one glance that they had just formed their nascent divinities a few days ago. Cheating? Where did that come from?" Daoist Qi snorted coldly, gave Reverend Huilin a sidelong glance, and said mockingly, "Could it be that senior has no choice but to twist words and force logic?" Reverend Huilin bellowed furiously, "I can't lose." Daoist Qi, how dare you? Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs exchanged a glance, then shook their heads at the same time. Clearly, Reverend Huilin was not a man of integrity. It was his own disciples who did not live up to his expectations, and it was fine if they lost, but why did he have to accuse Wu Qi of cheating? Nevertheless, no matter how they looked at it, there was nothing doubtful about Wu Qi's subduing of these 2 great pythons. It could only be said that Wu Qi was too lucky, and that was why he could get such a great reward. Without giving Reverend Huilin any chance to say more, Immortal Chuan cried out in a deep voice, "Yuanhua sect is the winner of this match. No more objections." He gave Reverend Huilin a glance, whose face had turned livid, and said coldly, "The second match will now begin. Patriarch Yuanhua of Yuanhua sect and Reverend Huilin of Huiling sect, please get ready for the duel." Reverend Huilin's expression flickered, and he suddenly burst into a loud laughter. "Yuanhua, old fogey, where are you?" Reverend Huilin became arrogant again. The smile had returned to his face, as if the crushing defeat just now had never happened. Chapter 402. Wu Qi stared coldly at Reverend Huilin, who was acting so arrogant and domineering. How could a guy like him cultivate to such a level? Reverend Huilin paid no attention to Wu Qi's meaningful gaze. He just raised his head and cried out loudly, "Yuan Hua, come out and fight me." His sonorous voice echoed across 10,000 miles in all directions. If Patriarch Yuan Hua were in the space where the ancient mansion was located, he would definitely be able to hear his voice. But, even after Reverend Huilin had called out dozens of times, Patriarch Yuan Hua still did not show up. Reverend Huilin became even more excited. He stared at Immortal Chuan and said loudly, "Immortal Monarch, Yuan Hua is not here. Could it be that he is too scared to show up? Does that mean I've won this match?" Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs exchanged a glance, hesitating and not daring to make a decision. This matter was related to the ownership of the headquarters of two immortal sects, and with so many immortals watching, if the patriarchs of the two immortal sects didn't have a serious fight to decide the ownership of the Green Cliff Star and Huang Qiao Star, the few immortal monarchs present on the scene would have a bad reputation. For example, would people say that these few immortal monarchs had been bribed by Huiling sect, and were intentionally siding with Huiling sect? The Celestial Court had a strict discipline. Although all immortal monarchs were very motivated, if they wanted to be promoted, their reputation as an official was also an important test. It was for this reason that Immortal Chuan mediated the conflict between Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect. If several dozens of heaven immortals were killed suddenly in the heavenly realms under his rule, it would definitely leave a heavy mark on his personal file. At least, he would be accused of not having a good control over the situation, and it would be a great obstacle to his future promotion. Every promotion of an immortal monarch represented real benefits. Heavenly realms with richer natural energy, larger territories, more abundant natural resources, and more immortals would be rewarded with corresponding immortal stones and immortal pills. More importantly, with every promotion, they would be able to receive guidance from those almighty experts in the Celestial Court, and be able to visit those almighty experts' immortal abodes to listen to the teachings of the Great Tao. That was the most important thing. Therefore, Immortal Chuan and the others didn't dare to make a rash decision. After all, this matter concerned two great immortal sects. Wu Qi looked at Immortal Chuan and the others, who had their eyeballs darting from side to side, and he immediately felt a great joy in his heart. The status of these people was similar to the village cadres on Earth. The competition between the two immortal sects was like a group fight between the people of two villages. This would have a huge impact on their performance evaluation. A bowl of water must be leveled, otherwise no one would know what would happen next. Coldly looking at Immortal Chuan and the others, Wu Qi recalled the plan they came up with in the Green Cliff Mountain. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the cloud path that he came from. At this time, there should be some movement on the wind-blown plains of Tsang-Tu planet, right? Could Daoist Min succeed? Upon thinking of this, Wu Qi turned to look at the group of eminent cloud sects heaven immortals. As the number one immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm, Eminent Cloud's sect had a total of 42 heaven immortals. However, there were only 11 of them here today. Of course, as the founding ancestral master of Eminent Cloud's sect, Reverend Yun was sitting cross-legged on the back of a large black crane, looking at Reverend Huilin with a smile on his face. However, Wu Qi felt that there was something wrong with the aura emanating from Reverend Yun. Could it be that the prophecy had really come? Seeing that Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs did not say a word, Reverend Huilin could not help but shout angrily, "Immortal monarchs, since Patriarch Yuanhua doesn't have the courage to fight, you should declare me the winner. According to the bet, this Green Cliff planet should belong to Huiling sect." Immortal Chuan cleared his throat. While frowning, he was about to say something, but suddenly, a stream of light cut through the chaotic airflow and broke into the ball-shaped space. In just a blink of an eye, Patriarch Yuanhua had arrived with blood all over his body. The pale golden blood on Patriarch Yuanhua's body had not dried yet, and was still emanating a very strong wave of immortal energy. Obviously, the blood had just flowed out from the body of an immortal. Patriarch Yuanhua flicked his long sleeve and wiped away the blood. He coughed violently, then laughed and said with a hoarse voice, Reverend Huilin, you can't wait any longer? Well then, let's do it. Immortal monarchs, please be my witnesses. If Reverend Huilin is killed by my sword today, Huang Qiao planet will belong to Yuanhua sect. Patriarch Yuanhua coughed again. Golden blood was seen trickling down from the corner of his mouth. Laughing fiercely, he said, Huilin, come, let's fight to the death. With a wave of his right hand, a misty green cloud shot out from his fingertip, transforming into an immortal sword that looked like it was condensed from clouds and mist. It was faintly discernible, as if it did not have a real body, and began wheeling rapidly around him. This was the prime immortal item, the Cloud Shadow Sword, which Patriarch Yuanhua had spent several hundred periods of painstaking effort to gradually craft and temper after transcending his tribulation and becoming an immortal. When the sword beam was unleashed, Patriarch Yuanhua's body turned into a layer of mist, and it was difficult to lock onto him with divine will. Immortal Chuan gave the blood stains on Patriarch Yuanhua's body a thoughtful look, his brows knitted into a tight frown. With a serious expression, he cried out in a deep voice, "Fine, let's fight according to the bet. No matter who wins, if there is any conflict in the future, it can only be limited to the matter between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect. The conflict is not allowed to expand." What Immortal Chuan meant was very clear: if you want to fight and kill each other, that is your freedom. You can take revenge on each other in the future, but you are not allowed to call your friends and make the matter worse. There was a hint of threat in his tone. If you dare to make a scene, don't blame me for using the force of the Celestial Court to suppress you. Patriarch Yuanhua cupped his fist and bowed to Immortal Chuan, agreeing to his words. On the other side, Reverend Huilin leaped back about 100 miles. He rubbed his palms together, and a brilliant and strong golden beam shot out from his palms. It was a strange-shaped immortal sword with an ancient design, looking as if it was forged entirely from gold, and was constantly bursting with a large sheet of golden flame. This immortal sword was as wide as a palm and as long as 7 feet. From the tip of the sword to the hilt, a row of 13 fist-sized prismatic crystals were inlaid. Every single crystal flickered with a dazzling red light, and the flames of the light expanded and contracted like the heart of a living being. Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath as he looked at the immortal sword. It was an upper-grade immortal sword, a powerful immortal item that could only be crafted by heaven immortals of at least 18th tier or above, and the item spirit in it had a power equal to at least that of an 18th tier heaven immortal. With Reverend Huilin's overall strength that was equal to, or even slightly weaker than, Patriarch Yuanhua, how was it possible for him to control an immortal sword of at least 18th tier or above? Could it be that Reverend Huilin had the same innate energy as Wu Qi, and was able to attract an upper-grade immortal item? It did not make sense. When the golden immortal sword was unleashed, the weather immediately changed, and the scorching aura forced all the immortals to retreat. They stared at Reverend Huilin in surprise, and suddenly understood why he had the courage to rush to Green Cliff Planet and fight Patriarch Yuanhua, and even bet the foundation of his sect on it. With this immortal sword in his hand, Reverend Huilin had the right to do so. It was like a baby challenging another child with a rocket launcher, and it was a sure win. The problem was, when all the heaven immortals present scanned Reverend Huilin with their divine will, they found out that he only had a cultivation base of 28th tier heaven immortal. How could he control an upper-grade immortal sword like this? Immortal items had their own spirits, and they were the proudest of all. Without the corresponding overall strength, how could they be controlled by someone? With the golden immortal sword in his hand, Reverend Huilin laughed complacently and said, "Yuanhua, I'll kill you with my sword today." Yuanhua sect, hee. Reverend Huilin laughed hideously, and the meaning behind his words was clear. As long as he killed Patriarch Yuanhua, Yuanhua sect would no longer need to exist. With an immortal sword that was above 18th tier, Reverend Huilin's overall strength had increased by more than 10 times. He was determined to wipe out Yuanhua sect, and the energy stone planet that the two immortal sects were fighting over would definitely belong to Huiling sect. Although the immortal monarchs of the Celestial Court were nominally ruling all the heavenly realms, the only decisive factor between immortals was still the overall strength. The strong would win, and the weak would be prey to the strong. This was the eternal truth of immortal cultivators. Wu Qi stared coldly at Reverend Huilin, who was acting arrogantly. No wonder he had such a strong confidence to fight Yuanhua sect. But, he reckoned it was not too long ago that he obtained the golden immortal sword. Otherwise, Huiling's sect would not have fought Yuanhua sect for over 1,000 years, and still could not decide the ownership of the energy stone planet. According to the time, Reverend Huilin must have obtained the immortal sword just a few days before Wu Qi came to Puluo heavenly realm. The few immortal monarchs fixed their eyes on the immortal sword in Reverend Huilin's hand, their faces grave. It was especially true for immortal Chuan, whose face was alternating between blue and pale. With such a powerful immortal sword, Reverend Huilin's overall strength had surpassed immortal Chuan's. In the future, it would be difficult for immortal Chuan to manage Huiling's sect. The situation was giving him a headache. Among all the heavenly realms, there were some extremely powerful immortal sects, whose overall strength was so strong that they could ignore the laws of the celestial court. Those immortal monarchs who were in charge of the celestial court were living like their grandchildren, without any power or glory. Immortal Chuan really did not want to become an unlucky fellow like them. However, the golden immortal sword was so powerful that the group of immortals couldn't even stand firmly before it. How were they supposed to fight? While all kinds of thoughts were tumbling in everyone's mind, Patriarch Yuanhua suddenly laughed and said, "Huilin, it seems the item spirit of this immortal sword is severely injured, and has fallen into a deep sleep, right? Otherwise, how could you control it?" Reverend Huilin nodded and said, "Yes. When I found it, it was covered in wounds, and its item spirit was on the verge of shattering. I suppose some mighty immortal fell in a battle with someone, and his immortal item accidentally fell into Puluo heavenly realm. Luckily, I found it." Waving the immortal sword casually, Reverend Huilin let out a long laugh and said, "Yuanhua, if your Yuanhua sect can be merged with Huiling's sect, I can." Patriarch Yuanhua shook his head. Without paying any attention to Reverend Huilin, he carefully and respectfully pulled out a strip of cloth from under his sleeve, measuring 6 inches long and 2 fingers wide. It looked like a strip of cloth that was casually torn off from his clothes. A few runes were scribbled on the strip of cloth with pale golden blood, and it was emanating a very faint wave of immortal energy. Patriarch Yuanhua gave Reverend Huilin a cold look, then pointed his finger at the strip of cloth. Suddenly, it burst into flames. A tiny beam of golden light shot out from the strip of cloth, crossing 100 miles of void and lightly falling onto Reverend Huilin's body. Amidst the terrified gazes of all the immortals, Reverend Huilin suddenly vanished into thin air. Chapter 403. The group of immortals was struck with terror, and they took another big step back. Annihilated, completely annihilated. A mighty 28th tier heaven immortal was actually destroyed by Patriarch Yuanhua with that shabby-looking strip of cloth, leaving not even a broken soul behind. Such a power was simply too frightening. Without saying a word, Patriarch Yuanhua sprung forward, grabbed the hilt of the golden immortal sword, and quickly sent his divine will into it. Suddenly, numerous runes lit up on the surface of the immortal sword, and a faint buzzing could be heard coming out of it. In just a blink of an eye, Patriarch Yuanhua's divine will had approached the core of the complicated formation diagram, and vaguely came into contact with the item spirit, which was lying dormant in the sword's core. The surrounding immortals suddenly came to their senses. No matter how Reverend Huilin was annihilated, and no matter what method Patriarch Yuanhua used to suddenly destroy his soul, this immortal sword was simply too tempting. Although the item spirit of an immortal sword of 18th tier and above was severely injured, it could easily recover with some time and energy. With this immortal sword, they would be able to establish the foundation of being the #1 immortal sect in Puluo heavenly realm and the surrounding heavenly realms. Several hundred immortals struck at the same time. "Fellow immortal Yuanhua, please let us have a look at this sword," cried Chi-Chi. Suddenly, the void around Patriarch Yuanhua shattered, as several hundred huge hands formed from immortal energies reached out and grabbed towards him. But, as these huge hands were fighting and struggling with each other, they revealed a big flaw. The Cloud Shadow sword flashed and brought Patriarch Yuan Hua out of the void at top speed. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave a long cry and cried out, "Disciples of Yuan Hua sect, let's go. Immortal Chuan, that Huang Qiao planet belongs to Yuan Hua sect now." Daoist Qi flicked his sleeve. A plume of smoke towered up into the sky, wrapping up Wu Qi and all the disciples who participated in the life and death match, then transformed into a beam of light and fled along with Patriarch Yuan Hua. With the golden immortal sword in hand, Patriarch Yuan Hua flew in the front. Wherever the golden light passed, the chaotic airflow opened up a path, just enough for the disciples who were chasing after him to escape. However, the chaotic airflow had a bizarre nature and was extremely heavy. Even with the golden immortal sword in his hand clearing the way, Patriarch Yuan Hua's speed had dropped by at least 100 times. Although the disciples of Yuan Hua sect fled quickly, they were soon caught up by the immortals behind them. At the very front was Guru Gu He, who had a solemn appearance and was emitting a faint golden light. The string of Buddha beads in his left hand suddenly transformed into hundreds of soft and translucent Buddha lights and shot out, smashing towards Wu Qi and the others like a storm. Guru Gu He cried out in a deep voice, "Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, this sword is fated with the Buddhist League. Please put it down and form a good relationship with the Buddhist League." A deep, muffled chanting that sounded like thunder was heard coming from within the over 100 balls of Buddhist light. The disciples of Yuan Hua sect who only possessed the cultivation base of nascent soul realm felt their heads tremble, and one after another, they rolled their eyes and fainted. Daoist Xiao and the rest of the 10 nascent divinity disciples were trembling uncontrollably. Although they were protected by the cloud unleashed by Daoist Qi, their nascent divinities were still shaking violently inside their bodies, nearly disintegrating into nothingness. Guru Gu He even slapped his forehead, unleashing a beam of Buddhist light that transformed into a huge claw shaped like the sharp claw of a great rock, grabbing towards Patriarch Yuan Hua. All the immortals could see that a large sheet of golden flame had burst out from the immortal sword in Patriarch Yuan Hua's hand. It looked like Patriarch Yuan Hua was on the verge of wiping out the divine will Reverend Huilin had left in the sword, and was about to brand his own divine will on the severely injured item spirit. Once Patriarch Yuan Hua took control of this severely injured immortal sword, with his cultivation base of peak stage 28th tier, his overall strength would skyrocket by a few times. Even if the few immortal monarchs joined forces, they would still be no match for Patriarch Yuan Hua. Therefore, they had to stop Patriarch Yuan Hua from refining the immortal sword now. As long as they could delay him for a moment and interrupt his refinement process, they would be able to seize the immortal sword with the joint attack of over 1,000 heaven immortals. As for who the immortal sword would belong to in the end, there must be a lucky one, right? And all the immortals felt that they were the lucky one. At that moment, Wu Qi suddenly gave a long cry and waved his left hand. Countless dragon-scaled golden beams shot up into the sky, flying towards the over 100 balls of Buddhist light that Guru Gu He had thrown down with a jarring whistle. The dragon-scaled golden lights hit the Buddha light intensely, causing the Buddha light to burst into muffled bangs. The dragon-scaled golden lights shattered into pieces, but the Buddha light that was falling from above was also deflected by the huge impact of the dragon-scaled golden lights. More than 100 Buddha lights plunged into the chaotic airflow not far away, and disappeared after a turn. Guru Gu He was so angry that he nearly coughed blood. The string of Buddhist beads was a precious treasure that he had been carrying with him since he began his cultivation. After being strengthened by his Buddhist power and willpower for countless years, it had become one with his mind, and its power was not weaker than ordinary immortal items. But, after being struck by Wu Qi's attack, the string of Buddhist beads was swept away by the chaotic airflow. Not even a primordial immortal could find such a small string of Buddhist beads in the chaotic starry sky. It was a well-known fact that Buddhist cultivators had always lived a poor life. Usually, they only had 2 or 3 Buddhist treasures, which were the condensation of all their Buddhist power and willpower. They did not pay much attention to other worldly possessions. As for Guru Gu He, he only had this string of Buddhist beads, which was the only Buddhist item he carried with him. All his years of cultivation had been spent on this string of Buddhist beads. Despite the fact that Guru Guhi's cultivation had reached a certain level, he was still so angry that he began to curse out loud. "Damn you, Junior! Give me back my treasure!" Guru Guhi furrowed his brows. He was too lazy to chase after Patriarch Yuanhua. Instead, he waved his right hand, shooting out a huge claw that looked like the sharp claws of a rock towards Wu Qi's head. If the claw managed to grab hold of Wu Qi, with the gap in their overall strength, Wu Qi would definitely have his bones broken and tendons torn, killing him instantly. At this moment, Guru Guhi did not care whether Wu Qi was fated with the Buddhist League or not. Wu Qi snorted coldly and clenched his jaws tightly. He felt a throbbing pain in his heart. The Earth Element Dragon Scale Shield was unleashed just now, and at least 10,000 dragon scales were shattered by the Buddhist beads. It was a precious treasure crafted using the dragon scales that he looted from Wanying Dragon King's ancestral grave. After losing 10,000 dragon scales, both the offensive and defensive strength of the Earth Element Dragon Scale Shield had dropped by 40%. "Old bald donkey, give me back my dragon scales." Wu Qi was so angry that he jumped up and down violently. He glared at Guru Guhi, then opened his erect eye. Abruptly, over 100 blinding purple thunderbolts shot out from the cold electric mirror, smashing onto Guru Guhi's body. At the same time, Wu Qi took out all the immortal talismans given to him by Patriarch Jiang Yun, Bai Xia, and Qing Wu, throwing them behind him as if his life depended on it. Pilgrim Guhi gave a muffled snort. Visible lines of muscles bulged out from under his skin, as he had activated his golden Arhat body. The thunderbolts unleashed by the cold electric mirror landed on his body and exploded, producing loud tinkling noises as if he was striking a huge golden bell. However, it only tore a small patch of skin on his chest, and not even a single drop of blood gushed out. However, the cold electric mirror was, after all, fused with a clump of 9 Heavens Dipper Thunder essence, and after a long period of cultivation by Wu Qi, its power had reached the level of an ordinary immortal item. Although the thunderbolts did not severely injure Guru Guhi, they had consumed a great deal of his energy. He felt a dull pain in his chest, and his vision turned dark as he was forced to hover on the spot, unable to move. Several dozens of immortal talismans exploded. Instead of using the standard method to trigger the immortal spells and divine abilities contained in the talismans, Wu Qi used the most violent and direct method to detonate them at the same time. Large sheets of white clouds, water vapor, green mist, and strong light turned into a hazy ball of light and shadow and exploded. The sharp claws unleashed by Guru Guhi were instantly ripped to shreds, while the tunnel opened up by Patriarch Yuanhua was also destroyed by the explosion. As the immortal talismans twisted the tunnel, the chaotic airflows in the surroundings surged in a messy manner, nearly dragging Guru Guhi into the chaotic starry sky. It scared him so much that he cried out miserably, grabbing Reverend Miao Miao's ankle, who was rushing towards him. Only then did he manage to struggle out of the chaotic space. On the other hand, all the immortals who were chasing after them were blocked by the sudden collapse of the tunnel with their divine wills and visions. Because of that, the distance between them and Wu Qi became much further. Seizing the opportunity, Patriarch Yuanhua abruptly changed his flying direction, breaking through the chaotic starry sky and flying diagonally towards it. Bringing Wu Qi and the others, Daoist Qi quickly followed behind him. He did not forget to pat Wu Qi's shoulder and praise loudly, "Wu Qi, my good boy, you've done a great job." Patriarch Yuanhua, who was busy opening up a path in the front, also praised loudly, "You've done a great job. As long as we can make it through today, this immortal sword will be the cornerstone treasure of Yuanhua sect." "Excellent, excellent. I never expected Huiling to have such a precious treasure in her hand. That's why we messed up the situation. Otherwise, everything would be within our plan." Upon hearing that, Wu Qi smiled wryly. When they were having a secret discussion in Green Cliff Mountain, he did not expect this to be the result. Originally, everything had been settled. Wu Qi and the rest of the 110 disciples would defeat the disciples of Huiling's sect, seizing the ownership of the Energy Stone planet. This was the first step that they should take. After that, Patriarch Yuan Hua would stay in Green Cliff Planet until Reverend Huiling issued the challenge. At that time, he would rush to the scene through the teleportation formation that he had prepared beforehand, and face the severely wounded Reverend Huiling with his uninjured body. As long as Patriarch Yuan Hua killed Reverend Huiling, Yuan Hua sect would have won the match. But, unexpectedly, the reason why Reverend Huiling had the courage to raise his bet was actually an immortal sword of 18th tier or above. It had thrown the situation into chaos, forcing the people of Yuan Hua sect to flee in panic. Furthermore, Wu Qi was curious if Patriarch Yuan Hua would use that strange little strip of cloth if Reverend Huiling did not possess this immortal sword. As the little strip of cloth was able to kill Reverend Huiling in an instant, its origin must be extraordinary. Judging from its appearance, it should be Patriarch Yuan Hua's trump card. Nevertheless, although the situation had changed, the result was still good. Yuan Hua sect had won the Huang Qiao planet justifiably. Not only had their territory doubled in size, they had also occupied the entire Energy Stone planet. With that, the future of their sect was going to be very bright. At the thought of this, no matter it was Patriarch Yuan Hua, Daoist Qi, or even Wu Qi and the other disciples of Yuan Hua sect, all of them laughed out loud, their voices filled with complacency. Not only Huang Qiao planet and the Energy Stone planet, but Patriarch Yuan Hua had also obtained an upper-grade immortal sword. With that, Yuan Hua sect would definitely be the biggest power in Puyo Heavenly Realm in the future. With a powerful sect as their backing, the future development of their disciples would be unimaginable. Suddenly, the pressure coming from the front lessened, as Patriarch Yuan Hua brought all his disciples and rushed out of the chaotic starry sky. The immortal sword in his hands suddenly let out a faint cry. Taking advantage of the moment when the item spirit was at its weakest, Patriarch Yuan Hua had forcibly branded it with his divine will. Right at this moment, a strange beam of light approached from the side. It was Reverend Yun, who had come before Patriarch Yuan Hua in a flustered and exasperated manner. Yuan Hua, how dare you kill a disciple of Eminent Cloud's sect? Reverend Yun immediately unleashed a thunderbolt. Chapter 404. Time returned to the time when Wu Qi sneaked into the ancient mansion and subdued the innate Yin energy. On Green Cliff Mountain, Patriarch Yuan Hua, who had fully recovered from his injuries, had broken through the bottleneck of peak stage 28th tier and stepped into the realm of 27th tier heaven immortal, was sitting cross-legged on the mountaintop, exercising his nascent divinity and nourishing the cloud shadow sword in his spiritual ocean. Next to him was a teleportation formation, about 1,000 feet in diameter. It was a grand universal teleportation formation that could teleport him alone to the void where Wu Qi and the others were. Right when Wu Qi entered the spherical space where the ancient mansion was located, and at the moment when everyone's attention was attracted by the landmass, he had thrown a teleportation formation near the entrance. Therefore, Patriarch Yuan Hua was able to arrive at the scene of the duel with the fastest speed. A tiny green beetle was seen lying on Patriarch Yuan Hua's chest. It was the sun beetle of the mother-sun green beetles, while the other mother beetle was brought by Daoist Qi. As soon as the result of the duel was decided, Reverend Huilan would issue a challenge, and Daoist Qi would use his hand to stimulate the mother beetle, causing the sun beetle to react. That would allow Patriarch Yuan Hua to arrive in time. Patriarch Yuan Hua sat on the mountaintop, trying his best to adjust his condition. A faint smile could be seen on his lips. He was very satisfied with Patriarch Jiang Yun, Wu Qi, and all the other disciples. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect that Patriarch Jiang Yun could establish such a huge foundation, and train such an excellent group of disciples. Whether it was the duel or the duel, Yuan Hua sect was bound to gain a complete victory, and lay the foundation of becoming the #1 immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm. How could they have such a good opportunity during normal times? The Celestial Court had a very tight control over all the heavenly realms. If two great immortal sects were to fight each other for no reason, the immortal monarchs of the Celestial Court would interfere. Therefore, even though Yuan Hua sect's overall strength was far stronger than Huiling sect's, they could not openly occupy Huiling sect's foundation. But, Reverend Huilin actually came knocking on their door. No matter what trump card he had, Patriarch Yuanhua stroked the 3 strips of cloth in his sleeve, and his heart was immediately filled with confidence. When Patriarch Yuanhua was still an ordinary nascent soul cultivator, he was fond of traveling. As long as he could accumulate some energy stones, he would travel to various planets in Puyo heavenly realm through teleportation formations to broaden his horizons. One year, on a barren planet, Patriarch Yuanhua came across an immortal who had fallen from the sky, his body covered in blood, and only his head barely intact. The immortal was on the verge of death, but Patriarch Yuanhua's luck had taken a turn for the better. He found a green jade milk in that barren, desolate place that was only used as a transit planet for a void teleportation formation. It was a spirit medicine that could nourish the immortal soul, gather energy, and bring the dead back to life. On top of that, the green jade milk had been growing for tens of periods, and contained a very strong natural energy. With this spirit medicine, the compassionate Patriarch Yuanhua saved the immortal, who had lost all his limbs, and all his internal organs destroyed by the thunder flame, with only his head still barely recognizable as a human. After being saved by Patriarch Yuanhua, the immortal did not say anything. He just pulled off Patriarch Yuanhua's sleeve and left him 9 shabby-looking spirit talismans that looked like strips of cloth, as well as a promise. Patriarch Yuanhua had used 6 of the 9 spirit talismans in his many years of cultivation. Each of them had annihilated one or a group of formidable enemies of Patriarch Yuanhua. From nascent divinity cultivators, ordinary heaven immortals, to the few 29th tier fiend immortals who conspired to seize the foundation of Yuanhua sect 3 periods ago, none of them could escape the fate of annihilation with these spirit talismans. This was Patriarch Yuanhua's greatest secret, and also his greatest reliance. It was easy to imagine the overall strength of the immortal who was saved by Patriarch Yuanhua, as he was able to make such a powerful spirit talisman out of ordinary linen strips. The promise the immortal made to Patriarch Yuanhua was that if Patriarch Yuanhua could break through the realm of gold immortal one day, he would take him as his disciple, as well as all of Patriarch Yuanhua's disciples. If any of Patriarch Yuanhua's disciples could break through the realm of gold immortal, that immortal would take Patriarch Yuanhua as his disciple as well. Once he broke through the realm of gold immortal, that immortal would take him as his disciple as well. Patriarch Yuanhua twitched his lips and smiled wryly helplessly. He knew he was lucky enough to save an extraordinary figure, but the condition of taking him as his disciple was a little too harsh. Only a gold immortal could be his disciple. What was the cultivation base of that immortal? Patriarch Yuanhua breathed out a faint sigh and stopped his recollection. He ran his fingers over the 3 tiny strips of cloth talismans, wondering what kind of trump card Reverend Huilin would have waiting for him. But, no matter what trump card Reverend Huilin had, it could not be as powerful as these spirit talismans. Grinning coldly, Patriarch Yuanhua began to think about the discussion he had with Wu Qi and the others. Patriarch Yuanhua had always had the ambition to strengthen Yuanhua Immortal Sect, because with a strong foundation, he would be able to obtain more cultivation resources, such as immortal stones. With a great amount of immortal stones, the speed of immortals' cultivation could be increased. Therefore, a long time ago, Patriarch Yuanhua had begun to plant spies in other immortal sections. Initially, it was the disciples of Huiling's sect who found the clue about the planet of energy stones before Patriarch Yuanhua. But, Patriarch Yuanhua soon received the news, and was the first to set out. As a result, he found the planet earlier than Huiling's sect, and gained the upper hand in terms of morality. But this time, Eminent Cloud's sect had a very strange reaction after Catfish Flood Dragon devoured Yun Tianao's grandnephew. Immediately, Patriarch Yuanhua activated the spies in Eminent Cloud's sect, and found out some news that made his heart race. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python, Eminent Cloud's sect's biggest reliance, was about to transcend the thunder tribulation of shape-shifting. Once he transcended the tribulation, he would be able to transform into a human, and his divine abilities and magical power would be greatly improved. The reason why Eminent Cloud's sect had swallowed the grievance of Catfish Flood Dragon was that snow-armored heaven-devouring python could not make a move now, and Reverend Yun was afraid that someone might take advantage of him. Therefore, they dared not to pursue the matter. On the other hand, the higher-ups of Eminent Cloud's sect had come to a decision. Once snow-armored heaven-devouring Python transcended the thunder tribulation, Eminent Cloud's sect would seek revenge. What made Patriarch Yuanhua even more worried and angry was that Eminent Cloud's sect had long decided to annex Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect. Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect were fighting like tigers, and most of their heaven immortals were wounded. It would take them at least 10,000 years to fully recover. Therefore, no matter who won in the end, the overall strength of both immortal sects would suffer a great loss. Some of Reverend Yun's disciples from Eminent Cloud's sect were serving in the Celestial Court. As a result, the relationship between Eminent Cloud's sect and the Celestial Court was closer than that of all the other immortal sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm. Therefore, Reverend Yun had made a decision. After the duel between Patriarch Yuanhua and Reverend Huilin, no matter who won, one of them would die in the fight between two tigers. Eminent Cloud's sect would seize the opportunity to strike with all their might, devouring the one who lost between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect. In order to achieve this goal, Reverend Yun had even found a substitute, who transformed into his own appearance and watched the duel. As for Reverend Yun himself, he brought a group of tens of immortals from his sect, hiding somewhere near Huiling sect's Huang Qiao planet. Once he received the news of Reverend Huilin's defeat, he would immediately bring his men to Huang Qiao planet and destroy Huiling sect's foundation. Meanwhile, another group of 13 immortals from Eminent Cloud's sect had snuck into Yuanhua sect a long time ago, waiting to launch a surprise attack on Yuanhua sect's Spirit Pills Palace and other important places. If the loser of the duel was Patriarch Yuanhua, once he died, the morale of Yuanhua sect would plunge into chaos, and 13 heaven immortals would be more than enough to cause a great damage to Yuanhua sect. Eminent Cloud sect's wishful thinking had shaken the heavens, and Patriarch Yuanhua had cooperated with them, allowing them to do whatever they wanted. The 13 immortals from Eminent Cloud sect had snuck into Green Cliff planet a few months ago, disguised as itinerant cultivators. Currently, they were living in Green Cliff Immortal Market, spending their days leisurely, enjoying fine wine and beautiful women. But today, it was time to draw in the net. This was the plan put forward by Wu Qi. Since Eminent Cloud sect wanted to extend their hands to Green Cliff Immortal Market, they would have to cut off their claws. Even if they had to sacrifice the entire Green Cliff Immortal Market, they would have to kill all 13 heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect. With that, Eminent Cloud sect's overall strength would be greatly reduced, and they would no longer dare to lay their hands on Yuanhua sect. Even if Eminent Cloud sect brought the lawsuit to Immortal Chuan, Yuanhua sect would still be in the right. 13 heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect had snuck into Yuanhua sect for no reason. What good could that be? At that point in time, as long as they killed all the witnesses, they could just say that 13 heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect had attacked Yuanhua sect intentionally. With that, they would be the scapegoat, and Eminent Cloud sect would not be afraid of a lawsuit. Just as Patriarch Yuanhua was recalling the plan he and Wu Qi came up with, a communication jade slip placed next to him suddenly moved, and a soft voice drifted out from it. The grand array that was set up near the Green Cliff Immortal Market had already been activated, and the entire market had been completely surrounded. 13 heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect were now attacking the formation that trapped them. However, there were 10 heaven immortals from Yuanhua sect guarding Green Cliff planet, and they had the advantage of being the host. With the formation completely trapping the heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect, there was no chance for them to escape. After listening to the report from the disciples, Patriarch Yuanhua grinned coldly, then sped towards Green Cliff Immortal Market with his sword in hand. With the help of the formation, Patriarch Yuanhua fought a fierce battle and killed all 13 heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect. However, he himself suffered a serious injury as well. After killing all the heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect who had snuck into Green Cliff planet, Patriarch Yuanhua immediately heard a shrill cry from the Green Lotus immortals. Without hesitation, Patriarch Yuanhua stepped into the teleportation formation and rushed to the scene of the duel. When he saw that Reverend Huilan's trump card was actually an upper-grade immortal sword, Patriarch Yuan Hua immediately used a spirit talisman and killed Reverend Huilan on the spot. In the end, the immortal sword was too attractive, and attracted the attack of so many immortals at the scene. Without hesitation, Patriarch Yuan Hua brought all his disciples and fled from the scene. Unexpectedly, Eminent Cloud's sect reacted very quickly. Reverend Yun had already learned that his disciples who had snuck into Green Cliff Planet were killed. Knowing that his plan was exposed, Reverend Yun did not want to suffer such a loss. Flustered and exasperated, he immediately rushed over and stopped Patriarch Yuan Hua and his company. Relying on the fact that his cultivation base was stronger than Patriarch Yuan Hua, Reverend Yun threw all caution to the wind and unleashed a thunderbolt. But, what Reverend Yun did not know was that Patriarch Yuan Hua was no longer the same as before. He was now a 27th tier heaven immortal. Looking at the thunderbolt plunging down from above, Patriarch Yuan Hua grinned coldly. Abruptly, the immortal sword in his hand shone with a large sheet of golden light, transforming into a beam of light that swept out. Chapter 405. Daoist Yun's meticulous plan was ruined by someone, and he even lost 13 Heaven Immortal sect disciples. He was so angry that his brain was about to boil. 13 Heaven Immortal sect disciples were not in the realm of nascent soul or nascent divinity. Everyone below the realm of Heaven Immortal was an ant, and nascent divinity cultivators could be cultivated at any time. But, these were 13 Heaven Immortals. Eminent Cloud's sect had been established for several hundreds of periods, but they had only produced a total of over 40 Heaven Immortals. But, before he could get any benefits from the scheme, he had painstakingly schemed against Yuan Hua's sect and Huiling sect. 13 of his Heaven Immortals were killed. 1/3 of Eminent Cloud's sect's overall strength was wiped out just like that. More importantly, one of the 13 Heaven Immortals who were killed on Green Cliff Planet was Reverend Yun's illegitimate son. Yes, an illegitimate son. Reverend Yun had an affair with one of his disciples, and they secretly gave birth to this child. The blood essence of a Heaven Immortal was very precious. If not for the fact that Reverend Yun loved his disciple very much, he would not have agreed to give birth to this child. Nevertheless, since he had given birth to this child, Reverend Yun cherished him very much. None of the descriptions such as the apple of his eye could describe how much Reverend Yun loved him. In fact, Reverend Yun had even found a way to get this child to serve in the celestial court as long as his cultivation base improved by another level. But, today, Patriarch Yuan Hua had killed Reverend Yun's illegitimate son and 12 of his disciples. Yuan Hua, you old villain! Give me back my son! Exasperated, Reverend Yun did not care whether his illegitimate son could be exposed or not. After unleashing the first thunderbolt, he followed it up with several dozens of thunderbolts. Eminent Cloud sect's cultivation technique was based on the technique of water and thunder. The immortals of Eminent Cloud's sect had mastered the acquired water element thunderbolts, and the power of their thunder technique was second to none in Puyo heavenly realm. If it were any other day, Patriarch Yuan Hua would have suffered a great loss from the thunderbolts. But now, his cultivation base was at the same level as Reverend Yun, and he was armed with an upper-grade immortal item. Amidst the blinding golden light, a long golden beam shot out and swept away the dozens of thunderbolts unleashed by Reverend Yun. Then, the sword beam swept across Reverend Yun's body, causing his Daoist robe to glow with an immortal gleam. However, as the golden beam flashed, his defensive immortal robe was ripped apart, and the sword beam pierced right through his body. A miserable howl rang out. As Reverend Yun was not present just now, and did not know the origin of the immortal sword, he could never have dreamed that Patriarch Yuan Hua would be holding such a powerful weapon. The sword beam pierced through his body and sliced Reverend Yun's ribs into two. Golden immortal blood splashed in all directions. Reverend Yun's lower body was thrown far away, while 3 big mouths stretched over impatiently. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Catfish Flood Dragon opened their mouths and bit Reverend Yun's lower body, ripping it into 3 pieces and swallowing them. Wu Qi's eyelids twitched at the sight. It was such a good material, but it was wasted by these three fellows. Looking around, Wu Qi was wondering if he should expose some of his treasures, so that he could keep Reverend Yun's upper body. Suddenly, a loud rumble rang out from the chaotic starry sky behind him. Strange lights kept flashing and flashing, as over 1,000 immortals rushed out together with their disciples. Pilgrim Gu He was at the forefront, roaring furiously, "Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, that sword, and the Buddhist League." Guru Gu He shut his mouth abruptly, because Patriarch Yuan Hua had casually tossed the immortal sword up into the air. The immortal sword transformed into a dazzling golden beam of light, wheeling around Patriarch Yuan Hua for a while. It came with an extremely astonishing momentum, and a scorching heat wave came blowing at Guru Gu He's face, making it hard for him to breathe. Guru Gu He, who was originally angry, suddenly smiled sweetly. He put his palms together and softly chanted the name of Buddha, then said with a smile, "So that's how it is. I was wrong. This sword is destined to be with fellow immortal Yuan Hua. Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, if you have time, please pay me a visit on my barren mountain. We need to get to know each other." Patriarch Yuan Hua stroked his beard and laughed. He nodded and said, "I'll definitely pay you a visit." With a smile on his face, Pilgrim Gu He took a few steps back, gazed at Wu Qi with a friendly look in his eyes, and nodded his head intimately. It was as if the incident of Wu Qi knocking his prime Buddhist treasure away had never happened, and Pilgrim Gu He's attitude towards Wu Qi was extremely warm and affectionate. Wu Qi gave Pilgrim Gu He a cold glance. He was not in the mood to talk to this monk, who could change his expression faster than anyone else. Those immortals who rushed out from behind Pilgrim Gu He halted their steps as well. Since Patriarch Yuan Hua had refined this immortal sword, it would be too difficult for them to seize it. For a moment, all the immortals who had joined hands to attack Patriarch Yuan Hua turned to him and said, "Congratulations on obtaining such a precious treasure, fellow immortal Yuan Hua." As the saying goes, spirit treasures choose their own masters. Fellow immortal Yuan Hua is a man with great fortune. Patriarch Yuan Hua nodded with a smile, cupping his fist and greeting the immortals enthusiastically. Only Reverend Yun flew back to Eminent Cloud Sect's team with a stream of blood in his body. The Reverend Yun, who was sitting on the giant black crane, cried out in alarm. With a twist of his body, he transformed into a burly man with a long beard, grabbed Reverend Yun's upper body and cried out, "Master, who hurt you?" Although that was what he asked, the burly man's eyes had already turned to look at Patriarch Yuan Hua. It was a well-known fact that apart from Immortal Chuan, Reverend Yun was the strongest expert in Puyo Heavenly Realm. Among so many immortals present, apart from Patriarch Yuan Hua, who else could cut Reverend Yun's body into two so cleanly and neatly? Patriarch Yuan Hua smiled and shook his head without saying a word. He was in a good mood now, and was just waiting for Eminent Cloud Sect to make their move. He did not want to waste his breath. Reverend Yun pointed his fingers in the air, barely forming a dozen incantation gestures to stop the blood from bursting out. After that, he cried out at Immortal Chuan with a heart-wrenching voice, "Immortal Monarch, please seek justice for Eminent Cloud Sect. Yuan Hua Sect has killed 13 of our heaven immortals for no reason, and even beat me into such a sorry state. Immortal Monarch, please seek justice for Eminent Cloud Sect." At this moment, Reverend Yun really wished he could establish a good relationship with Immortal Chuan. If he had a daughter, he would be more than happy to give her to Immortal Chuan as a concubine. But now, he was severely wounded, and his sect had lost 13 heaven immortals. The overall strength of Eminent Cloud's sect had suffered a great loss, and without the support of a powerful backer, Eminent Cloud's sect might really face the calamity of destruction. In recent years, Eminent Cloud's sect had been acting in an unscrupulous and overbearing manner. From the incident of Yun Wuqi forcibly robbing Peppermint and Angelica, one could easily tell what kind of conduct Eminent Cloud's sect had. No one knew how many enemies were secretly keeping their eyes on Eminent Cloud's sect. If they were not careful, Eminent Cloud's sect's foundation would be torn apart by countless enemies. Upon seeing Reverend Yun's miserable appearance, Immortal Chuan could not help but narrow his eyes, giving Patriarch Yuan Hua a quick glance. Patriarch Yuanhua cupped his fist and said, "Please seek justice for me, immortal monarch." It was Eminent Cloud's sect who sent their disciples to sneak into Green Cliff Planet, hiding in Green Cliff Immortal Market and plotting against us. As Yuanhua was meditating and preparing for the duel in Green Cliff Mountain, they mistakenly thought that I had left Green Cliff Planet. Therefore, they suddenly launched an attack with the intention of looting Green Cliff Immortal Market, and were killed by Yuanhua. Please investigate this matter, immortal monarch. Reverend Yun rebuked furiously, "Bullshit. That stinks." The disciples of Eminent Cloud sect looting Green Cliff Immortal Market is simply. Overwhelmed by extreme anger, Reverend Yun no longer cared about the elegance of his words. Looking at Reverend Yun's expression, Wuqi could not help but interrupt, "How could a man with a mouth full of bullshit say others are bullshit? This is the real stinking smell. Why did 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud sect sneak into Green Cliff Immortal Market without notifying us? Don't tell me they are short of money, so they went to the brothels in Green Cliff Immortal Market to sell their bodies?" Grinning coldly, Wuqi said viciously, "Although there are brothels in Green Cliff Immortal Market, they only serve girls and prostitutes. Green Cliff Immortal Market does not do this kind of business. Immortal Monarch, if the reason why 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud sect sneaked into Green Cliff Planet was not to loot Green Cliff Immortal Market, could it be that they were really there to sell their buttocks?" Patriarch Yuanhua's eyelids drooped as he burst out laughing. As immortals were concerned about their dignity, they would never say such vicious words. As Wuqi was just a nascent soul cultivator, what could he do even if he cursed at him? Patriarch Yuanhua was very angry when Reverend Yun cursed him a moment ago. Therefore, Wuqi's nonsensical words were exactly what he wanted. Reverend Yun's eyes went wide with anger when he heard Wuqi's words, and he nearly choked on his breath. Pointing his trembling finger at Wuqi, Reverend Yun roared furiously, "Immortal Monarch Chuan! How dare he interrupt such an ignorant and immoral junior?" Immortal Chuan was taken aback, hesitating for a brief moment. If it were any other nascent soul cultivator who dared to interrupt, he would have already killed him. But as for Wuqi, Immortal Chuan still remembered the bag of energy stones he gave him as a bribe. How could he bear to kill such a sensible and sensible young man? Clearing his throat, Immortal Chuan smiled and said, "Wuqi, you have to watch your words. How could a fellow immortal from Eminent Cloud sect do something like that?" Changing his tone, Immortal Chuan asked Reverend Yun, "But, why did 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud sect go to Green Cliff Planet?" Reverend Yun was tongue-tied, and could not say anything for a moment. Right at this moment, the sound of drums and bugles was heard coming from afar, as 30 flying ships approached at top speed. These flying ships were 10,000 feet long and over 100 feet wide, with pavilions as tall as 6 stories built on the deck. Thick and heavy metal decks were densely hung on the outside of these flying ships, engraved with countless complicated ancient runes. Standing on the prow of each flying ship was a group of tens of heavily armored soldiers. They were tall and burly, yet they did not emanate any energy ripple. Behind these soldiers was a thin layer of mist, within which, the shadows of various ferocious beasts could be vaguely seen. On the flying ship in the middle, a 10 feet tall burly man was hammering a dragon-skinned war drum with a deafening sound. Although there was no air in the starry sky, the drumming still went straight into everyone's ears, causing them a dull pain in their ears and making them lose their balance. There was a tall flagpole on every flying ship, on which a huge flag, measuring several tens of feet in circumference, was fluttering even though there was no wind. With a keen eyesight, Wuqi saw a huge character, "U," several tens of feet in both width and length, embroidered on the flag. Using this pale green character as the background color, a row of characters was embroidered neatly in the middle of the flag. "Do you patrolling heaven, guarding the land and protecting the people, Marquis Jianyu Hua Heavenly Realm, Marquis Jianyu?" Immortal Chuan was taken aback. Together with the other immortal monarchs, he cursed at the same time, "Marquis Jianyu Zong, what is he doing here? Damn it!" It was a spectacular sight to see a few immortal monarchs cursing at the same time. Even Wu Qi could not help but be stunned. After that, cold sweat broke out from Wu Qi's back as he exchanged a glance with Princess Zhanglu in shock. Marquis Jian. Yu Zong. Chapter 406. Human Emperor. Ever since the ancient great saint, Huang clan, joined hands with many almighty experts and created the human race by combining the bloodlines of divine dragons, phoenixes, qilins, and many other divine beasts, using the divine light and spirituality of the myriad spirit cauldron as the foundation and combining them with the bloodlines of divine dragons, phoenixes, qilins, and many other divine beasts, human emperors were born. Some were wise, some were mighty, some could cut through all the obstacles and create a fertile land for the human race to survive, and some could slay demons and devils to protect the development of the human race. Since the era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the human race had built the only dynasty since the beginning of time, Yu. Human Emperor De Yu had infected all the heavenly realms, appointed the protector of the people, and protected the human race in all directions. Accompanied by the muffled beating of dragonhide war drums, 30 flying ships approached the crowd at top speed. Wu Qi saw the strange expressions on the faces of Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs. It was as if there was a big pile of dog poop placed in front of them, and they had no choice but to swallow it, licking their lips and saying that it tasted delicious. It was an indescribable expression. Wu Qi also noticed that Immortal Chuan's left hand, which was placed behind his back, had clenched into a fist with blue veins protruding out of the back of it. Suddenly, loud shouts of, "Ha!" were heard coming from the flying ships. It was a thunderous roar, and filled with towering killing intent. Large groups of armored soldiers rushed out of the cabins and lined up on the deck like Chi-Chi, their eyes flickering with a cold gleam as they stared coldly at the immortals and cultivators on Wu Qi's side. An undisguised hostility and opposing aura made Wu Qi frown. The relationship between Marquis Jian, Yu Zong, and the immortals was not good. The reaction of the heaven immortals from the nearby heavenly realms was also very interesting. Cautiously, they retreated a few miles back and formed into the most traditional formation of 9 palaces and 8 trigrams, assuming a defensive posture. The heaven immortals stood on the periphery, while their disciples guarded the inner formation. It reminded Wu Qi of the African bison back on Earth. When they encountered wild beasts, they used this formation to protect their calves. The might of a human emperor was indeed extraordinary. Holding Princess Zhongli's hand, Wu Qi looked coldly at Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs as they walked towards the flying ship in the middle. Patriarch Yuanhua raised his hand and gestured for all the immortals and cultivators of Yuanhua sect to step back and join the 9 palaces and 8 trigrams formation. A deep laughter rang out from the flying ship in the middle. A chariot pulled by 3 flood dragons darted out from the flying ship, flying towards Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs, escorted by nearly 100 armored warriors. On the chariot, a valiant-looking middle-aged man, who was wearing a jade-colored battle robe and a light golden armor, and had a crimson cloak on his back, was sitting straight on a bronze throne that was carved with countless images of fierce beasts, looking at them coldly. The appearance of this middle-aged man was 80% similar to Yu Heda, Yu Hetian, and Yu Heling. Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu exchanged a glance. Yu Zong, the Marquis Jian of Yu dynasty who governed Yuhua Heavenly Realm, was the father of the 3 dead men. Yuhua Heavenly Realm was a mid-upper-grade heavenly realm that was very far away from Puyo Heavenly Realm, and it was where Yu Zong, Marquis Jian, governed. His jurisdiction covered a very vast area of the starry sky around Yuhua Heavenly Realm, and even Puyo Heavenly Realm was under his jurisdiction. Of course, after several apocalypses, the Celestial Court was established, and the almighty experts in the universe had set the rules. The Celestial Court governed the immortals, the human emperor governed the mortals, and the mortals and immortals ruled independently without interfering with each other. Although Yu Zong's jurisdiction was very vast, he was just a marquis of the land protector conferred by the human emperor. Thus, he had no authority over the immortal monarchs of the Celestial Court. Immortal Chuan and the others were just fearful and helpless when facing Yu Zong. Immortal Chuan laughed dryly, sounding like he was crying. He realized that it was a very unpleasant laughter, and stopped abruptly after a few dry laughs. Then, he cupped his fist and bowed to Yuzong, who was sitting in the chariot, and said, "Greetings, Marquis Jian." Sitting in the chariot, Yuzong did not rise to his feet, nor did he return the greeting. Instead, he gave Immortal Chuan a cold grin and said arrogantly, "Dispense with the formalities." The three simple words made the faces of Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs turn red instantly. A faint immortal pressure spread out and quickly enveloped all the armored soldiers on the 30 flying ships led by Yuzong. All the armored soldiers let out a loud cry at the same time. A towering killing intent converged into a nearly corporeal sword energy, slashing viciously onto the immortal pressure unleashed by Immortal Chuan and the others, ripping it into pieces. Suddenly, Patriarch Yuan Hua laughed in a low voice and said, "This Marquis Jian, Yuzong, is just as the rumor said, arrogant and unruly. He, if not for the fact that the celestial court has to show some respect to the human emperor, someone like him would have long been killed by those almighty immortals." Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he asked in a low voice, "Ancestral Master, roughly how strong is this Yuzong's overall strength?" Patriarch Yuan Hua said coolly, "Yuzong, Marquis Jian, is the overseer of Yuhua Heavenly Realm, protecting the safety of the human race in this part of the universe. TSK, this is just an empty title. The mortals living in the territories of various immortal sects have long established their own dynasties. How can he interfere in their affairs? He is nothing more than a spy sent by the human emperor of Yu dynasty to this part of the universe. His overall strength is really strong. I reckon his cultivation base is at least equivalent to a 20th tier heaven immortal. 20th tier heaven immortal. His overall strength was about 200 times that of a 36th tier heaven immortal. Compared to Patriarch Yuan Hua's current cultivation base of 27th tier, Yuzong's overall strength was about 4 times greater. But, with the golden immortal sword in his hand, Patriarch Yuan Hua's overall strength was more than enough to fight against Yuzong. Therefore, he did not have to fear Yuzong's overall strength. There were tens of thousands of armored soldiers on the 30 flying ships brought by Yuzong, and their overall strength was not weak at all. Yuzong's military strength was far stronger than any immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm, and this was the biggest fear these immortals had for him. None of the immortal sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm had such a strong backing like Yuzong. The few immortal monarchs, who were infuriated by Yu Miao's rude behavior just now, had their immortal aura shattered by the killing intent unleashed by the armored soldiers. Their bodies trembled, and their faces turned extremely unsightly. Immortal Chuan sneered and said, "Is Marquis Jian purposely trying to humiliate us by coming here? If Marquis Jian only wants a few enemies, we know we are no match for him. I'll report to Heavenly Lord Senyu of Yuhua Heavenly Realm now, and ask him to explain things to Marquis Jian. What do you think?" Heavenly Lord Senyu of Yuhua Heavenly Realm was an experienced heaven immortal with an extremely profound cultivation base. He was the immediate superior of Immortal Chuan and the few other heavenly monarchs, and was in charge of controlling the vast starry sky around Yuhua Heavenly Realm. His territory was even larger than Marquis Jian's Yuzong, and he was the only person who could suppress Yuzong in this region. On top of that, Heavenly Lord Senyu had a very strong backing in the Celestial Court. No matter it was his own overall strength or the power behind him, he could easily suppress Yuzong. Upon hearing Immortal Chuan's words, Yuzong suddenly sneered and said, "Using Heavenly Lord Senyu to suppress Yuzong? He. While laughing coldly, Yuzong rubbed his nose. There were a few very obvious black lines on his nose. Obviously, they were the marks left by the ghost aura in his body after he was struck by the ghost curse unleashed by Princess Zhanglu last time. Princess Zhanglu twisted her tiny waist complacently, then gently grabbed Wu Qi's palm and sent a voice transmission to Wu Qi. "How is the power of Zi Xian's curse?" Even a 20th tier heaven immortal could not withstand the power of that ghost curse. Wu Qi nodded silently. It was a little surprising that the ghost curse unleashed by Princess Zhanglu had really hurt Yuzong. Yuzong let out a few unpleasant hisses from his nose, then put down his palm and said in a cold voice, "I know that you, Immortal Chuan, have found an ancient mansion of Yu dynasty. Immortal Chuan's expression changed abruptly. With a livid face, he cried out, "What do you want?" Yu Zong waved his hand and put on a very generous face as he said, "I'm not in a good mood these days, so I won't waste my breath on you. I only want the treasures left in the core of the ancient mansion. Those treasures belong to the human race, and they are useless to you immortals. Apart from that, I won't take anything from you. What do you say?" Immortal Chuan's face turned even more unsightly. "That's unreasonable," he said coldly. "If you bring those treasures of the human race to the market in the celestial court, you can exchange them for a considerable amount of immortal stones, immortal items, or immortal pills. How can you just take them for nothing?" Yu Zong rubbed his nose, and the unpleasant hisses came from his nostrils once again. His body trembled slightly, and he said angrily, "Cut the crap. I'm not going to take all these benefits for nothing. I've brought so many soldiers here, and I've spent so much on eating and drinking all the way here. I've brought 30 battleships with me, and the energy stones I've spent to travel across the starry sky are not small. Immortal Chuan, don't be so shameless." Wu Qi shook his head. Why is this Yu Zong behaving like a bandit? Of course, as he had just lost 3 sons, Wu Qi could understand his feelings. Looking at Immortal Chuan and the others, Wu Qi sighed silently. Vaguely, Wu Qi had a feeling that Yu Zong was venting all his anger on Immortal Chuan and the others. Daoist Qi came next to Patriarch Yuan Hua and asked in a low voice, "Master, if a fight breaks out, are we going to help the immortal monarchs?" Patriarch Yuan Hua turned his head and gave the heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud sect a look. Apart from Reverend Yun, a few Eminent Cloud sect immortals were staring at them with a fierce gleam in their eyes. Patriarch Yuan Hua shook his head lightly and said, "If a fight breaks out, bring your children back to Green Cliff Planet, then go and reinforce your junior brother. I'll stay here and hold the line for the few immortal monarchs." With the golden immortal sword, Patriarch Yuan Hua was filled with confidence, and said that he would help the few immortal monarchs to hold the line. When his words were heard by the other heaven immortals, they were filled with envy and jealousy. But, Reverend Yun's heart sank. Reinforce Daoist Min. Why would Daoist Qi reinforce Daoist Min? What was Daoist Min doing now? While all the immortals were having their own thoughts, Yu Zong suddenly gave an impatient roar, clenching his right fist and thrusting it toward Immortal Chuan. Immortal Chuan did not expect that Yu Zong was really as barbaric as the rumors said, and the punch landed squarely on his body. The official robe of immortal monarchs worn by Immortal Chuan was a lower-grade immortal item given to him by the Celestial Court when he was appointed as an immortal official. As soon as Yu Zong punched out, a crisp bird cry rang out from Immortal Chuan's immortal robe, and a green sparrow darted out from it, bringing with it a large cloud of smoke. The cloud of smoke wheeled and wheeled, and there was a vague gleam of rivers and mountains flickering in it. Yu Zong's punch sank into the cloud, and suddenly became slower and slower. Yu Zong sneered, then suddenly cried out, "Jade butterfly hissing wind, kill!" A jade-colored cloud of smoke rushed out from behind Yu Zong's back, within which came the soul of a jade-colored butterfly, about 1,000 feet long, with a flash, transformed into a beam of strong jade-colored light, and attached itself to Yu Zong's right arm. The power of Yu Zong's punch was suddenly increased by at least 100 times. Accompanied by an extremely unpleasant ripping noise, dozens of holes were ripped open on Immortal Chuan's immortal robe, as Yu Zong's punch landed on Immortal Chuan's right chest. Countless jade-colored butterfly-shaped beams shot out from Yu Zong's fist and smashed into Immortal Chuan's body. Immortal Chuan howled miserably as his right chest was completely shattered, and his right arm was knocked flying away by Yu Zong's punch, together with a large amount of golden immortal blood and pale golden flesh. Tens of thousands of armored soldiers on the 30 battleships roared in unison, and all 30 battleships charged forward abruptly. Chapter 407. The few immortal monarchs flew into a rage when they saw Yu Zong's attack. Without hesitation, they ordered their immortal officers and disciples to charge forward and engage in a fierce battle with Yu Zong's army. Meanwhile, all the heaven immortals of the 5 heavenly realms had fled in all directions. Apart from Patriarch Yuan Hua and a few others who stayed behind to keep an eye on the few immortal monarchs, the others had long fled with their disciples. Wu Qi wanted to stay and watch the show. After all, Lady Dark Goldwater did not have many memories about Yu Dynasty, and she only had a vague memory of its existence. At first, Wu Qi was wondering if this Yu Dynasty was a small dynasty in some mortal world where Lady Dark Goldwater was born. But little did he expect that it was actually a colossal dynasty built by the entire human race. While pondering over this question, Wu Qi's body suddenly trembled as he suddenly recalled some books Lu Xiaobai had read in the past. Yu, Xia, Shang, Zhou. Is this Yu Dynasty the one recorded in the few ancient books on earth? The one that claimed to be even more ancient than Xia Dynasty? 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Yu Dynasty, Huahuang clan. Could this Yu Dynasty be that Yu Dynasty? With his mind filled with wild thoughts, Wu Qi held Princess Zhang Li's little hand and followed Daoist Qi back to Pyuyo Heavenly Realm. All the disciples who participated in the match had been teleported back to Green Cliff Planet, and only Daoist Qi brought Wu Qi and the few others to Tsang-Tu Planet through a teleportation formation. In the windy plain of Tsang-Tu Planet, the vast flatland measuring 1,000 miles in circumference sank 1,000 feet into the ground. Huge holes and cracks could be seen everywhere, and the ground was stained with golden and red blood. 2 groups of cultivators were engaged in a life-and-death battle. Together with 18 Yuanhua Sect's Heaven Immortals, Daoist Min was attacking 10 Eminent Cloud Sect's Heaven Immortals, while several hundred Yuanhua Sect's Nascent Divinity and Nascent Soul disciples were attacking the less than 100 Eminent Cloud Sect's disciples. A great python, over 3,000 feet long and as white as snow, with scales glinting with a dazzling watery gleam, was spreading its wings, throwing its head back and roaring furiously, spraying a large sheet of blood-red light at a crimson tribulation cloud in the sky. The tribulation cloud rotated unhurriedly, preparing for the next wave of powerful attacks. A strong demonic aura burst out from the great serpent's body. Because of this cold and murderous demonic aura, the area covered by the tribulation clouds grew larger and larger, and the lightning tribulation that was brewing also grew stronger and stronger. The stronger the fiendish demon and the more ancient the bloodline of the fiendish demon, the more terrifying the lightning tribulation they would have to endure. The snow-armored serpent had reached the level of 25th tier Heaven Immortal before it had to face the thunder tribulation of form transformation. It was not hard to tell how strong it was. However, it was obvious that the thunder tribulation of form transformation that it was about to face was definitely more powerful than the thunder tribulation that an orthodox demon would have to face after transforming into human form. On Myriad Immortals' planet, those demon imperial advisors and sinecures of the 6 dynasties could transform into human form even though they only had the cultivation base of nascent soul realm. Compared to this snow-armored heaven-devouring python, who had to cultivate to the 25th tier Heaven Immortal realm to face the lightning tribulation of transformation, the gap between them was like the distance between the clouds and the sky. The great serpent's body was riddled with several dozens of huge wounds, and several dozens of scales that were charred and pitch-black by the explosion. After being wounded, the ferocious nature in its bones was aroused. The little immortal aura emanating from its body immediately transformed into a towering evil aura. The dark green demonic aura blanketed an area of several tens of miles in circumference, causing the tribulation clouds in the sky to expand even faster. This was the scene that Wu Qi and his company saw when they arrived at Tsang-Tu Planet. The disciples of Yuanhua sect led by Daoist Min had gained the upper hand in all aspects. Apart from the fact that the number of heaven immortals brought by Daoist Min was much greater than that of the enemy, they had also launched a sneak attack from behind, and had the help of spies. Furthermore, they had exhausted over 70% of the immortal talismans and Guiyuan vibrating bombs stored in Yuanhua sect's storage. Upon seeing this, Daoist Qi whistled, brought Wu Qi and the others and charged towards the disciples of Eminent Cloud sect. With the fall of Reverend Huilin, the decline of Huiling's sect was imminent. Eminent Cloud sect's Reverend Yun was severely wounded, and they had lost 13 heaven immortals. If they could kill all 10 heaven immortals here, then take the opportunity when the snow-armored heaven-devouring python was transcending its thunder tribulation to kill this cornerstone of eminent cloud sect, they would lose their status as the #1 immortal sect in Puyo heavenly realm, and Yuanhua sect would definitely rise to power. The bamboo stick in Daoist Chi's hand transformed into layers of green shadows, transforming into a green flood dragon and swinging its claw at the head of one of eminent cloud sect's heaven immortals. The defensive immortal barrier of the heaven immortal had been badly damaged by Daoist Min caught off guard by Daoist Chi's sneak attack, the barrier shattered on the spot, and the flood dragon ripped the top of his head open with one claw. Several tens of green-wood immortal thunders burst out from the flood dragon's mouth, smashing into the heaven immortal's head. A miserable shriek echoed out as the immortal's immortal body fell to the ground. A golden immortal's soul soared up into the sky, trying to flee. However, the flood dragon transformed from the bamboo stick thrown out by Daoist Chi gave a deafening roar, coiling its body abruptly and transforming into a dazzling green rope that tightly bound the immortal's soul. The sound of wind and flame was heard as a large sheet of red flame burst out from the green rope, burning the immortal's soul and making it shriek miserably. This was the power of an immortal item. The item's spirit had already cultivated to the realm of spirit immortal, and its intelligence was comparable to that of an immortal. It could control the immortal item better, and change its divine abilities and spells according to the actual situation on the battlefield. With the help of the item's spirit's incantation, the power unleashed by the immortal item would be at least twice as strong as usual. Daoist Chi had killed one of the enemy's heaven immortals with just one strike, throwing eminent cloud sect's formation into chaos. One of the immortals cried out sternly, "Retreat! All disciples of eminent cloud sect, retreat at once!" But, before the immortal could utter 2 words, another heaven immortal cried out sternly, "Don't retreat! Patriarch Shue's thunder tribulation has just descended. No one is allowed to retreat. Protect Patriarch Shue at once. As long as he can transform successfully, all these villains will have to die." While all the disciples of eminent cloud sect were at a loss of what to do, Daoist Chi had already joined the battle with a few heaven immortals who came with him. Wu Qi let out a long laugh as he spat out the sword of Greedy Wolf and the Xuanhao sword from Chi-Chi's sleeves. As Wu Qi's cultivation base had improved tremendously, when the sword of Greedy Wolf was unleashed, it would turn into 21 pitch-black wolf heads, streaking across the sky while leaving long trails of light behind them. As long as they touched a human body, a large piece of flesh would be ripped apart by the razor-sharp sword beams. Meanwhile, the Xuanhao sword transformed into a large sheet of pitch-black water mist, rushing forward together with several dozens of looming vortexes. No matter it was flying swords or magical treasures, as long as they were not upper-grade spirit items, they would be corroded by the water mist and slowly crushed into powder. Lord Xiansheng and Catfish Flood Dragon simply transformed into their true forms of flood dragons, plunging into the group of eminent cloud sect's nascent soul and nascent divinity disciples, slaughtering them without holding back. Catfish Flood Dragon was carrying a huge hammer in her claw, smashing it in all directions, giving those eminent cloud sect's disciples a great pain. When any ordinary magical treasures touched the heavy hammer, they would immediately lose their luster and crack. Before long, a dozen of eminent cloud sect's disciples were smashed into meat patties and swallowed by Catfish Flood Dragon. However, what made those eminent cloud sect's disciples, and even those heaven immortals feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts was Princess Zhanglu, who was standing quietly at a distance. She stood on a cloud, her hands constantly changing incantation gestures. She chanted some simple spells, such as seal, crack, shatter, restrict, and some other spells. Suddenly, all the energies of those disciples of eminent cloud sect vanished, or their connection with their flying swords and magical treasures were suddenly cut off, or their bodies were ripped apart for no apparent reason. There were even 2 heaven immortals who were accidentally struck by Princess Zhang Li's spell, staggering and falling from the sky with their vision darkening. In the end, those heaven immortals from Yuanhua sect saw the opportunity, and a few immortal swords shot through the air, riddling their bodies with holes. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python threw his head back and roared furiously. "Little brats of Yuanhua sect! Just wait until I transcend my thunder tribulation of form transformation. I'll definitely put you in a life and death situation. Children of Eminent Cloud's sect, you. After a brief moment of hesitation, snow-armored heaven-devouring python bellowed, back off. I don't believe I can't transcend this tribulation. It would have been better if snow-armored heaven-devouring python did not shout, as Goldhorn and Silverhorn had their attention fixed on those dead Eminent Cloud sect disciples. His loud roar immediately made the two brothers turn their greedy gazes towards him. Two unpleasant dragon roars rang out, as Goldhorn and Silverhorn transformed into two beams of light and sped towards snow-armored heaven-devouring python. He is just a mere snow-armored heaven-devouring python. I'm the big brother, so I want 60% of his blood essence. Silverhorn did not want to be outdone. As the big brother, you should take care of the little brother. 60% of his blood essence is mine. Shouting and yelling, the two brothers charged towards snow-armored heaven-devouring python, opening their bloody mouths and biting down towards him. Suddenly, snow-armored heaven-devouring python raised his head and fixed his eyes on Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Dragon pythons of fire and ice? Shouldn't you have gone extinct long ago? His voice was filled with unconcealable shock and fear. His tone was filled with both anger and fear, and everyone present could hear it loud and clear. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python's reaction made the hearts of many Eminent Cloud sect disciples sink. Not only did this great python of 25th tier heaven immortal realm not dare to fight Goldhorn and Silverhorn, he even spun and fled. He even ignored the thunder tribulation that could strike down from the sky at any time, twisting his body and fleeing into the distance in a wretched manner. Saliva sprayed out from Goldhorn and Silverhorn's mouths as the brothers chased after snow-armored heaven-devouring python with all their might. They were emanating a frightening aura that could only be sensed by the same clan of serpents. It was an absolute suppression that only natural enemies could have on their prey. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python even ignored the fact that Goldhorn and Silverhorn only had the cultivation base of nascent divinity realm. He let out a shrill howl of terror and fled into the distance in a wretched manner. Daoist Chi and Daoist Min nearly fell from the sky. If they knew this snow-armored heaven-devouring python was so afraid of Goldhorn and Silverhorn, why would they fight so desperately? Why would they come up with a plan of a raid of 10,000 miles? Looking at how fast snow-armored heaven-devouring python was fleeing, Wu Qi grinned coldly. With a flick of his left wrist, a beam of purple light shot up into the sky, transforming into several dozens of thin purple ropes in just a blink of an eye and tying up the python's body tightly. Goldhorn and Silverhorn roared joyfully and charged forward. Disregarding any danger, the brothers wrapped themselves around snow-armored heaven-devouring python and gave him a heavy bite. In an instant, 2 large strips of flesh were bitten off from the python's body. You've eaten his flesh, but leave his scales to me, or I'll skin you alive. Wu Qi cried out hastily. The scales of a 25th tier heaven immortal great python were much better than those left behind by Wanying Dragon King's ancestors who had ascended to the immortal world. Daoist Qi cried out hastily as well, we've eaten his flesh, but the scales belong to Wu Qi. As for the serpent bones and tendons, they are supreme grade materials for crafting immortal items. Daoist Min did not care that Goldhorn and Silverhorn were Wu Qi's demon pets. He roared at the top of his voice, there must be a serpent pearl in this snow-armored heaven-devouring python's body. Leave the serpent pearl, and I'll exchange all my belongings with you. While the group of people was shouting and yelling, the tribulation cloud trembled, and a violent thunderbolt, about 1 mile in diameter, struck down. Chapter 408. When the thunder tribulation came crashing down, Goldhorn and Silverhorn suddenly realized what a stupid thing they had done. Any thunder tribulation, as long as there were other living beings within its range, would have its power increased by several times. Not to mention that they were 2 great pythons, a species whose bloodline was even more ancient and powerful than that of a snow-armored heaven-devouring python. Therefore, the power of this thunder tribulation was at least 10 times stronger than that of a snow-armored heaven-devouring python. The crimson thunderbolt was dark and gloomy like dried blood. When it came crashing down from 100 miles up in the sky, the entire windy plain trembled, and even the Tsang-Tu planet under their feet seemed to twitch abruptly. Jin Jiao and Silverhorn wailed as they tried to escape from the snow-armored heaven-devouring python's body. However, the brothers were afraid that they would not be able to hold their prey tightly, so the three snakes twisted their bodies into braids. How could they escape in a hurry? Seeing that the crimson thunderbolt was about to hit his head, Goldhorn was so frightened that his saliva sprayed all over his face. "Master, sir, senior, young master, help. We can't take it. We can't even take a single thunderbolt." Silverhorn was crying so hard that his tears sprayed out like a fountain. Looking pitifully at Wu Qi in the distance, he cried out, "Boss, manager, help. Our lives are very precious. If the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice wants to flourish and grow stronger, we have to shoulder the responsibility." A five-colored ray of light flashed behind Princess Zhongli's back, and in the blink of an eye, she had come next to Wu Qi. With a wave of her hand, she sent a five-colored ray of light toward the tribulation cloud above her. Immediately, a deep, muffled rumble of thunder rang out from the cloud, and the tribulation cloud, which covered an area of 100 miles in circumference, shrunk by 10%. The thunderbolt that had just shot out from the tribulation cloud and was about to burn Goldhorn and Silverhorn, as well as the snow-armored heaven-devouring python, was weakened by 30% as well. Just as Princess Zhongli was about to cast a divine ability to disperse the tribulation cloud, Wu Qi suddenly shouted, "Wait, wait." When the thunder tribulation of shape-shifting descended, Wu Qi unleashed his sword beam and plunged right under it. Then, he opened his erect eye, and a mirror shrouded in clouds, as thin as a piece of paper, and with countless lightning sparks flashing within it, rushed out of it and slowly hovered above Wu Qi's head. After the cold electric mirror had absorbed the essence of the lightning tribulation, it had developed its own intelligence. After being nourished by the innate energies of 5 elements in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, the cold electric mirror had gradually recovered its original appearance. The cold electric mirror was an immortal item that belonged to an ancient water immortal, who lived in the underwater mansion occupied by Catfish Flood Dragon. However, after the water immortal's death, the cold electric mirror's artifact spirit was damaged and fell into a long slumber. Through the passage of time, the grade of the cold electric mirror had declined, and it eventually turned into an ordinary magical treasure. After being nourished by the essence of the lightning tribulation, and especially refined by Wu Qi's innate energies of 5 elements, the artifact spirit in the cold electric mirror had gradually awakened, fusing with the newly born intelligence of its artifact spirit, and gradually regained its original appearance. The arrival of the lightning tribulation today had made the cold electric mirror jump with excitement. The snow-armored heaven-devouring python was planning to borrow a wisp of life force from the lightning tribulation to get rid of its python body and transform into a human form, while the cold electric mirror was planning to borrow the power of the lightning tribulation to reforge its newly fused artifact spirit, allowing it to transform into a spirit immortal and regain its original essence as an immortal item. When the lightning tribulation fell, the cold electric mirror gave a joyful cry. Large sheets of clouds sprayed out from its surface, transforming into a huge net that swallowed the huge thunderbolt into its surface. After absorbing the thunderbolt, the once cold electric mirror suddenly turned bright red. Strange lights kept bursting out from its surface, and vaguely, a tiny figure with a blurry figure, purple-blue in color and flickering with countless electric sparks, could be vaguely seen amidst the flashing lights. From the information sent to him by the cold electric mirror, Wu Qi knew what was happening. Hastily, he kept sending his divine will into the mirror, carefully injecting the energy of his soul into the tiny blue figure. After receiving the source of soul energy generously injected by Wu Qi, the artifact spirit of the cold electric mirror immediately grew rapidly like a balloon. Especially because it was the body of an artifact spirit that had been reforged by Wu Qi's source of soul, it was equivalent to Wu Qi's incarnation, and could no longer be separated from him. Another thunderbolt fell, and the cold electric mirror happily swallowed it into its body. The energy of the thunderbolt was digested by the cold electric mirror, while the tiny wisp of fortune contained in the thunder tribulation was carefully guided into its body by the artifact spirit. Using Wu Qi's source of soul energy as the material, and the tiny wisp of fortune as the glue, the artifact spirit gradually returned to its original body according to its previous appearance. The artifact spirit of the cold electric mirror was a little fish. It was 1 foot and 2 inches long, shaped like a crucian carp, with a translucent body, and a row of gorgeous silver-blue fins that stretched out from its back, measuring several feet in length. It looked like a dreamy little fish. After absorbing the power of 71 thunderbolts in a row, the artifact spirit raised its head happily and cried out into the sky. The cry was melodious and pleasant to the ear, but when it reached a far distance, it suddenly turned into a thunderous roar that left several dozens of cracks on the wind-climbing plane. Bringing with it a large sheet of electric sparks, the artifact spirit wheeled quickly around Wu Qi. Wu Qi reached out his hand and held on to the artifact spirit of the cold electric mirror, then nodded his head happily. The artifact spirit was so agile, and had a very strange appearance. Even the scroll of stealing did not record the origin of this strange fish. Clearly, it was not a species that was born naturally, and should be a mutant of some unusual fishes. After a long slumber, the artifact spirit had forgotten many things. Apart from most of the principles related to thunderbolts found in the core of its soul, everything else had been worn away by the passage of time. He had even forgotten his own name. Wu Qi stroked the fish, casually gave it a name of cold electric, then threw it back into the cold electric mirror. Seeing that the artifact spirit of the cold electric mirror was successfully reborn, a 5-colored auspicious ray shot up into the sky behind Princess Zhongli's back, transforming into several dozens of 5-colored chains and plunging into the tribulation clouds. As she waved her hand, a loud rumble of thunder rang out in the sky, as if the sky was about to collapse. The red clouds moved quickly in all directions, turning the sky the color of blood. The 5-colored chains broke off from Princess Zhongli's back, swaying as they drifted towards those disciples of Eminent Cloud sect, who were struck dumb with astonishment. From the remaining 4 to 5 heaven immortals, to over 30 nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples, each of them had a 5-colored chain formed from auspicious rays attached to their bodies. The chains were shapeless, and did not emit any energy ripple. No matter how the disciples of Eminent Cloud sect struggled and tore them, they just refused to budge, and remained firmly attached to their bodies. The tribulation cloud disintegrated, and several dozens of huge balls of thunder and flame came smashing down along the 5-colored chains. It was so fast that no one could cover their ears. Before these remaining disciples of Eminent Cloud's sect could dodge, the thunderbolts had already smashed into their bodies along the 5-colored chains. A few miserable howls rang out, as the bodies of a few heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud's sect were ripped apart, leaving behind only their immortal souls that fled in all directions in a sorry state. As for the rest of the nascent divinity and nascent soul immortals, nothing was left behind. How could these ordinary cultivators withstand the materialization thunder tribulation that was aimed at snow-armored heaven-devouring python? Using a mystic technique, Princess Zhongli had triggered all the power of the thunder tribulation in the tribulation clouds and released it in an instant, landing on the bodies of these disciples of Eminent Cloud sect and seriously wounding them on the spot. Those immortal souls wanted to flee, but there was no way they could do so. Daoist Qi and Daoist Min recovered from the shock, and immediately launched a deadly attack, turning all the souls of Eminent Cloud sect's heaven immortals into ashes. When Goldhorn and Silverhorn saw that the materialization thunder tribulation had vanished, they immediately lay down on the body of snow-armored heaven-devouring python with great satisfaction, then began to devour his flesh and blood. They still remembered the request of Wu Qi, Daoist Qi, and Daoist Min. They spat out all the scales as if they were eating the shells of melon seeds, and kept all the snake tendons and bones intact. As for those snake cores that Daoist Min asked for, there were indeed 24 white snake cores emanating an immense cold air in snow-armored heaven-devouring python's body. Goldhorn and Silverhorn knew that Daoist Min and Wu Qi's lineage did not get along well, so they did not swallow the snake cores into their mouths. Instead, They kept dripping their saliva onto them, purposely trying to disgust Taoist Min. If not for the fear of being scolded by Wu Qi, the brothers could have done something even more disgusting. While Gold Horn and Silver Horn were enjoying their prey, and the disciples of Yuanhua sect were busy cleaning up the battlefield, picking up the intact magical treasures, talismans, spirit pills, and many other things from the dead enemies, a green-red tribulation cloud suddenly appeared, wheeling slowly in the sky. With just one look at the tribulation cloud, Wu Qi knew that it was the immortal spirit tribulation that a spirit item had to go through when it transformed into an immortal item. It was just like when a nascent divinity cultivator wanted to ascend into an immortal, and he had to go through a thunder tribulation. Now, the cold electric mirror was facing its immortal spirit tribulation. Raising his head to look at the thunder tribulation, Wu Qi pointed his finger out. Immediately, the cold electric mirror spun and transformed into a bright and clear beam, shooting straight into the sky and flying into the tribulation cloud that was taking shape. The cold electric mirror shone brightly, as the enormous power of thunder tribulation in the tribulation cloud was quickly absorbed by it. In just a quarter of an hour, the tribulation cloud had vanished without a trace, and all the tribulation thunders had become the nourishment for the mirror. Wu Qi summoned the mirror back, then happily shoved it back into his forehead. Right now, there was a vertical eye on his forehead, glinting with a purple gleam. From time to time, wisps of faint electric arcs could be seen flashing in it. Following Wu Qi's will, when the vertical eye was closed, it would turn into a thin purple gleam. Once it was opened, a cold gleam could be seen shooting out from it, with endless clouds and electric arcs roiling and rocking in it. It contained a vast pressure, and was a very astonishing power. Taoist Qi clicked his tongue and exclaimed in admiration. Wu Qi's fortune was truly enviable, as he was able to own an immortal item even though he was just a nascent soul cultivator. There was also the spirit-restricting rope that trapped the snow-armored heaven-devouring python, which was also an immortal item. Although it was a 33rd tier lower-grade immortal item, there were many nascent divinity disciples in Yuanhua sect who did not own an immortal item. Joyfully, he activated the cold electric mirror. Soundlessly, a thunderbolt shot out from between his brows and hit a small hill about 100 miles away. The ground trembled slightly, and the hill that stood about 1 mile tall was instantly turned into ashes. Taoist Qi clapped his hands and praised Wu Qi's good luck, while Taoist White Sparrow, who was standing behind Taoist Min, was staring at Wu Qi with a gloomy expression. Wu Qi raised his head and gave Taoist White Sparrow a glance. A killing intent rose in his heart. Chapter 409. On Green Cliff Planet, everyone in Yuanhua sect, including Patriarch Yuanhua, was rejoicing. The banquet was held in Patriarch Yuanhua's small world, Green Cliff Immortal Abode. Over 30 Yuanhua sect heaven immortals, as well as all their disciples of Jin Dan realm and above, were present at the banquet, joyfully celebrating the few great events that had just happened to Yuanhua sect. Firstly, they had defeated Huiling sect, killed Reverend Huilin, and won the Huang Qiao planet and the planet of energy stones. Secondly, they had defeated Eminent Cloud sect, severely wounded Reverend Yun, and killed over 20 heaven immortals and snow-armored heaven-devouring python. With that, they had dropped Eminent Cloud sect from the number 1 immortal sect in Puyo heavenly realm to the 5th. With that, they had replaced Eminent Cloud sect as the fully deserving number 1 immortal sect in Puyo heavenly realm. Thirdly, Patriarch Yuanhua had obtained an upper-grade immortal sword. With this immortal sword, Yuanhua sect's dominant position in Puyo heavenly realm was unshakable. Fourthly, Patriarch Yuanhua had saved Immortal Chuan of Puyo heavenly realm from the hands of Yuzong, Marquis Jian. Immortal Chuan had promised Patriarch Yuanhua that he would recommend a few heaven immortals from Yuanhua sect to the celestial court using the backing of his sect. With that, Yuanhua sect would have a good relationship with the celestial court. With the protection of the celestial court, Yuanhua sect's future development would be more stable and reliable. With a few great events happening one after another, how could Yuanhua sect not be overjoyed? Immortal Green Staff generously took out all the spirit wine he brewed, and all the immortals drank to their heart's content. Even with Patriarch Yuan Hua's strong cultivation base, he was 70 to 80% drunk. Everyone in Yuan Hua sect left happily. All the immortals returned to their abodes, while the other disciples returned to their posts. Chi-Chi had activated all the restrictive formations on Green Cliff Mountain, guarding against any counterattack from Huiling sect or Eminent Cloud sect. When he left Green Cliff Immortal Abode, Wu Chi's body flickered, and the celestial fiend puppet replaced him, returning to Greenwood Peak with Princess Zhang Lu and the others. As Immortal Green Staff and the others were drowsy from the drunkenness, and with Wu Chi's ingenious escape art, none of them discovered his little trick. In the blink of an eye, Wu Chi had traveled thousands of miles, all the way to Qingsang Peak, where the Green Cliff Mountain's protective formation core was located. Not long after Wu Chi stayed at the foot of Qingsang Peak, a cloud slowly drifted over. Taoist White Sparrow and Taoist Mo Wan were seen standing side by side on the cloud, while a few disciples of Taoist White Sparrow stood beside them. From afar, he heard Taoist Mo Wan's voice, "White Sparrow, don't mess with them anymore." Taoist White Sparrow remained silent, while Taoist Mo Wan breathed out a long sigh and said, "The Ancestral Master has spoken. Unless Master wishes to betray Yuan Hua sect, he can no longer go against them. Now that Yuan Hua sect has a bright future ahead of them, it's pointless to waste our energy for some old matters." Wu Chi was hiding in a huge tree, restraining all his spirit, energy, and divine sense, and listening to the conversation between Taoist Mo Wan and Taoist White Sparrow. Taoist White Sparrow had stirred up trouble in Spirit Herb's palace, torturing Peppermint and Angelica. After that, Elder Taiyu held him accountable, and he was chased out of Spirit Herb's palace. Taoist Min felt helpless. After all, he was a disciple of his sect, and he had brought many disciples back to the sect to help in the war. It was a great show of filial piety. Therefore, Taoist Min had no choice but to arrange Taoist White Sparrow to stay on Qingsang Peak, asking him to look after the operation of the protective formation. It had only been slightly over a year since Taoist White Sparrow returned to Yuan Hua sect, but he had been promoted from the supervisor of Green Cliff Immortal Market to the supervisor of Spirit Herb's palace, and then to the guardian of the protective formation. The few changes in his position were all related to Wu Chi. Taoist Min had entrusted Taoist Mo Wan with the task. Now that Yuan Hua sect was on the brink of prosperity, and everyone would be able to obtain great benefits in the future, Taoist Min had made the wise choice to mend the relationship with Taoist Chi. Since they were about to mend the relationship, it was a little inappropriate for Taoist White Sparrow to keep pestering Wu Chi. Therefore, Taoist Mo Wan seized the opportunity to enlighten Taoist White Sparrow. Wu Chi grinned coldly upon hearing that. The Jade Bone's soul-searching flag was still hiding in his spiritual ocean, and was being slowly subdued by Wu Chi. As Taoist White Sparrow regarded this immortal item as his own life, it was absolutely impossible for him to reconcile with Wu Chi. Of course, if Wu Chi returned the Jade Bone's soul-searching flag to Taoist White Sparrow, he would be able to put this matter behind him. But, as it was not easy for Wu Chi to obtain such a high-grade immortal item, how could he possibly return it to Taoist White Sparrow? Therefore, the enmity between them was set in stone, and there was no room for reconciliation. Taoist White Sparrow had revealed his killing intent to Wu Chi over and over again. How could Wu Chi not kill him, and how could he feel at ease? After nagging and persuading Taoist White Sparrow for some time, Taoist Mo Wan could not help but feel angry when he saw Taoist White Sparrow's silence. He snorted coldly, flicked his sleeve, spun and left without bothering to pay any more attention to Taoist White Sparrow. As Taoist White Sparrow was afraid of losing face, he did not tell anyone that his immortal item was taken away by Wu Chi. During the battle in Green Cliff Immortal Market, when Taoist White Sparrow took out the Jade Bone's soul-searching flag, even his disciples were knocked out of their minds. Apart from Wu Chi and himself, no one knew that Taoist White Sparrow had such a powerful immortal item, and no one knew that it was actually taken away by Wu Chi. Seeing his master leave in a rage, Taoist White Sparrow was in a dilemma. At last, Patriarch Yuan Hua spoke out and tried to mediate the relationship between the two disciples. With him in charge, both Daoist Qi and Daoist Min were willing to reconcile. Although Daoist White Sparrow had one of his arms chopped off by Patriarch Jiang Yun, it was nothing compared to the enormous benefits brought by the bright future of his sect. After spending 100,000 years in a laborious cultivation, transcending the thunder tribulation and becoming a heaven immortal, his arm had fully regrown. Therefore, he could put aside the little grudge between them. But, the Jade Bone's soul-searching flag. At the thought of this immortal item, Daoist White Sparrow's heart raced. With such a powerful immortal item, he even felt that the grade of Jade Bone's soul-searching flag should be a few grades higher than the immortal sword Patriarch Yuan Hua obtained. An immortal item of such grade was extremely rare. How could Daoist White Sparrow be willing to part with it? Should he tell Daoist Min and Daoist Mo Wan about it, and force Wu Qi to return it to him? Daoist White Sparrow's heart raced again. If he told them about the immortal item that was a few times higher than Patriarch Yuan Hua's, perhaps he would not be able to keep it anymore. Staring at Daoist Mo Wan's back that was disappearing into the distance, Daoist White Sparrow clenched his jaws as he stared at Qingcang Peak and said in a low voice, "Wu Qi, oh Wu Qi, you've made me suffer a lot. Well, since that is the case, don't blame me for being too cruel. My disciples, keep a close watch on Wu Qi's every move for the next few days, and when he is alone, I'll kill him and bring all of you away from here." Daoist White Sparrow suddenly thought it through. With the Jade Bone's soul-searching flag in his possession, so what if he betrayed Yuanhua sect? Not only could he kill Wu Qi and seize the flag back, he could also find two immortal items, the immortal mirror of cold lightning and the spirit-restricting rope, from Wu Qi. Perhaps, he could even find some other good stuff. That was worth the risk. As long as he could bring all his disciples out of Green Cliff Planet and return to his sect, he could abandon the sect and flee with all his disciples. With that, he could easily find a new place to settle down. Narrowing his eyes, Daoist White Sparrow grinned coldly and said, "In for a penny, in for a pound." In the past, when I was in Yuanhua sect, I was only an outer sect disciple despite spending 1,000 years studying the Tao. Only after struggling painstakingly for over 100,000 years did I achieve what I have today. Since when did Yuanhua sect mistreat me? Not only will I kill Wu Qi and seize back what belongs to me, I'll also teach Yuanhua sect a good lesson. Laughing ferociously, Daoist White Sparrow said complacently, "I've painstakingly brought my disciples back to reinforce my sect, but I didn't even get any benefits from it. I don't really care about such a heartless sect. After I kill Wu Qi, we'll destroy the core of Green Cliff Mountain's defensive formation, and let Eminent Cloud's sect and Huiling sect find trouble with them." Wu Qi shook his head, and his mind was filled with confidence. Since Daoist White Sparrow was about to betray Yuanhua sect, Wu Qi would not feel any mental pressure after killing him. Laughing coldly, Wu Qi's fake nascent soul, which was cultivated with the Dark Yin water scripture, suddenly rushed out from the top of his head. A large sheet of cold energy spread out in all directions, blotting the sky and covering the earth. Amidst the cold energy, some white runes could be seen faintly visible, and the space 1 mile in circumference was suddenly enveloped by an extremely thin crystal wall. This crystal wall was the Dark Yin crystal barrier, which Lady Dark Goldwater used to defend against Wu Qi's attack. It was the divine ability with the strongest defensive strength found in the Dark Yin water scripture. Unless 10 cultivators with the same cultivation base as the user were to attack it at the same time, there was no way they could break the defense of the Dark Yin crystal barrier. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base, he was able to fight head-on against a 36th tier Heaven Immortal. Without 10 Heaven Immortals joining forces, no one could break the crystal wall. What was even more amazing was that, as the Dark Yin crystal barrier was gentle and reserved, all auras within it would be shielded by it. As a result, no matter how hard Wu Qi fought inside, no one would be able to find out what was happening in here. Unless someone happened to sweep their divine will towards this place, no one would be able to find out what was happening in Wu Qi's place. Taoist White Sparrow felt a chill running through his body, and the frightening cold air even slowed down the flow of his blood. "Who are you, fellow Taoist?" he cried out in alarm. Wu Qi was too lazy to talk to Taoist White Sparrow. Since there was enmity between them, he might as well kill him quickly and cleanly. Why should he waste his breath? With a casual wave of his hand, the spirit-restricting rope transformed into a shocking purple beam and shot out, binding up Taoist White Sparrow and all the disciples behind him. As Wu Qi's cultivation base was now much stronger than before, the power of spirit-restricting rope had naturally improved significantly. As Taoist White Sparrow was tied up by the spirit-restricting rope, even the thinking ability of his immortal soul was completely restricted. It was even worse for the few disciples behind him. Their fleshly bodies and nascent divinities were crushed by the spirit-restricting rope, and they died miserably on the spot. Wu Qi leaped forward, while Goldhorn and Silverhorn rushed out and devoured all of Taoist White Sparrow's disciples. After that, Wu Qi grabbed Taoist White Sparrow and casually pointed a finger at his forehead. The divine flame of order shot out and burned into Taoist White Sparrow's body. In just a blink of an eye, Taoist White Sparrow was refined into several hundred blood and soul crystals. After shoving all the blood and soul crystals into the Black Dragon Spirit Ring, Wu Qi gathered 90% of his energies and transformed them into the Dark Yin immortal energy through his fake nascent soul. Then, according to a technique found in the Dark Yin water scripture, Black Water Thunder Suppressing Technique, he condensed it into a black thunderbolt the size of a human head in his palm. Casually, he threw the thunderbolt towards Qing Tsang Peak. After that, Wu Qi retrieved Gold Horn and Silver Horn, spun and left. The thunderbolt flew leisurely towards Qing Tsang Peak, brushing past it at an oblique angle and slamming into a lofty mountain behind it. A muffled thunderclap echoed out, and the lofty mountain 100 miles in circumference was shattered by the thunderbolt. All the natural energies were transformed into snow-white ice flakes that shot in all directions. A bright gleam flickered on Qing Tsang Peak, and amidst the latent force of the thunderbolt, the entire mountain was shaking violently, nearly collapsing. Wu Qi patted his buttocks and left. Yuanhua sect, which had just finished its celebration banquet, was plunged into chaos. Countless sword beams were shooting in his direction. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.